Good evening, everyone. It is Thursday, September 15th, 2022, and we are gathered in the Athens-Clarke County City Hall for a special called session of the Athens-Clarke County Mayor and Commission, which will be followed by a work session. Special called session is for a single purpose that I'll describe in just a moment. I'm going to ask Clerk Spratlin if she'll call roll for us.
Davenport,
Here.
Link,
Here.
Wright,
Present.
Denson,
Here.
Poole,
Here.
Edwards, Myers, here, Thornton, Hamby. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So we're gathered tonight to approve a resolution requesting a call for a special election for the purpose of filling the vacancy in the office of Commissioner of the District 2 of the Athens-Clarke County Unified Government. I want to ask first, is there any resident here who'd like to speak to this matter? All right, seeing none, we'll begin discussion. As everybody's aware, we have a vacancy on the body, and it's always been the practice that we have a resolution to call for an election when there's a vacancy on the body. I've made the recommendation based on two purposes that we have that election in March. First of those rationales is that we know that we've had a significant redistricting this year, and so we find ourselves in greatest legal clarity when we move into the new year, and so we are in an environment where the new maps are in effect. Second is simply sort of professional needs of anybody who's on this body. Everybody who's around me works very hard and has lots of responsibilities that they have to juggle, and I want to ensure that anybody who's going to step forward as a candidate for District 2 has prepared for that opportunity, and similarly that constituents are able to prepare to make a wise determination. So there's a resolution that was mailed out earlier this week, and I'd entertain a motion at this point.
Do we need a motion to suspend the rules first?
Motion for suspension of rules.
Move to suspend the rules.
Second.
All right, motion from Commissioner Houle to suspend the rules, second from Commissioner Link. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, is there a motion to the substance of the question? Commissioner Hamby.
I'll go ahead and make a motion to the substance of the question to approve the resolution, but if somebody's going to second it, I have some
All
questions
right,
for the
got a
attorney.
motion from Commissioner Hamby, a second from Commissioner Myers. Go ahead, Commissioner Hamby.
Sure, thank you. Attorney Drake, so Commissioner Thornton, who's out of town tonight, had an email come through, and she's, of course, not for the motion, but she does raise a good question in there. Can you explain to us why we're even having to do a resolution tonight?
Well, I think that it's always been the practice of this body when there is ever a need for the Board of Elections to call election, whether it be for SPLOST, TSPLOST, or for a vacancy in this body, that request be made. And I think that was the case with the vacancy when Commissioner Sims, and also with Commissioner
Carter.
Neesmith, correct. And so I think also it is part of ensuring that we're in compliance with Georgia law and directly and correctly, requesting that the Board of Elections do that. It's appropriate for us to do that.
Well, I guess I was just wondering that because we're not going to see this again, right? This is us calling. This is it, and it goes to the Board of Elections.
Yeah,
And
ultimately, the Board of Elections has the discretion
Right.
to call on a date they like, because they administer the elections.
Right. Okay. And just one final question. So it seems to me that it is a quandary about, the district lines being one way for the next few months and then another way the next few months. And either way, next few years, and either way either way you go could trigger a lawsuit if the election were held in November.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, and it just seems to me the cleanest way is by having it in March.
Yeah, I agree. It's very abundantly clear, I think, that if you have it in March, it's clear you use the new lines for District 2, and those voters within those new lines will vote.
Right. And can you clarify this for me? I think I know the answer, but I just want, and I'm going to hush after this. But the state would allow us to have an election, a called election at certain points, like in December. It could have been a runoff, but now they've narrowed that down to 2 different dates in the year. Is that
That's
right?
correct. Under OCJ, I think it's 21-2-540, the special, it governs when special elections are supposed to be held, and there are specific dates, the only times you're allowed to do it.
Okay. And I guess having it in March doesn't does that adhere to our charter where it says a seat can't be empty for 180 days or something like that?
Well, our charter says that if a seat is going to be vacant for less than 180 days before another election comes up,
Right.
then this body can appoint someone to fill that position. So we're acting in accordance with our charter because there's clearly more than 180 days left in the District 2 term. So the appropriate thing our charter says is for a special election to be held.
Okay, and I guess I'll just say this, and I'll stop, that, certainly this seat will be vacant until March, and I know the mayor has sent out some communications that he certainly will step in and help with any constituent services, and that's good, and I would encourage us all to do the same. I mean, we know people in everybody's district, so that's always a good way to make sure everybody's getting the help they need. Thank you.
No, thanks for that point, Commissioner Hamby. I appreciate that. I mean, a relative benefit of having a large body in a small piece of geography, the smallest county in the state, is that we do know people across the community, and I appreciate everybody stepping up, but I would let the public know that for whatever period of time the seat is vacant, I directly in my office are happy to provide whatever constituent services are necessary. Commissioner Myers.
Yeah, I prepared some remarks. I am support. I wanted to clarify my understanding of Commissioner Parker's resignation because there are some rumors floating around. There was, to my knowledge, no inside plot. I wasn't aware of any thoughts on a possible resignation until 3 days before the announcement, when we had a short conversation about the challenges of commission work. Even then, I had no idea of the timing of a possible resignation and no idea that their residence might be changing. I learned of the resignation when the public did on Monday, August 29th. I heard hint of her change of residence at the September 6th meeting and then confirmation in the letter to Governor Kemp on September 8th. What's clear, though, is that there's a lot of confusion. First, because of the announcement of the commissioner's resignation so close to a general election, and second, because it's happening on the cusp of the redrawing of commission district lines. And now we have two districts, the interests of two districts to consider, and we've heard from both people in both of those. There's the old District 2, almost 90% of which has become the new District 3. They are without a commissioner now. Starting in January, much of District 2 will be represented by the new District 3 Commissioner, Tiffany Taylor. Mayor Gertz and others, and myself included, are making ourselves available to respond to District 2 constituents until then. Still, the present old District 2 will definitely not have a commissioner for up to 4 months if we use the new lines and may feel deprived of representation. The new District 2 covers much of the old District 3. They lost their chance on whether to re-elect Commissioner Melissa Link because the new District 3 includes no one in the old District 3. They're now in District 2 and will be represented by whoever's elected through January 2005. The people who live in the present District 3 didn't get to vote in the May elections. If the old District 2 lines are used, they'll not again get to vote on the commissioner to represent them for the next 2 years. They will feel disenfranchised. Finally, there are the logistics of finding candidates for elections and setting up elections, and they're what makes it clear that I must support Mayor Gertz's resolution. I listened to Tuesday's Board of Elections meeting, and Director Sosby made it clear that her department will follow whatever the Board of Election decides for the special election. She also addressed the logistics involved in running the election in November, difficulties identifying who can vote since the voting lists have already switched. They will need to get extra voting machines from the state to run this required separate election. Over 2,000 people have already submitted absentee ballot applications, and people will have to submit a separate application to vote in the special District 2 election. Additional poll workers would be needed and more. For candidates and voters, a November election would also be difficult. Possible candidates would have at most 10 days to figure out if they're eligible to run and to qualify, and then 2.5 weeks to campaign before absentee and early voting starts on October 7th. In addition, if someone's elected from the 80% of the old district, then that person would not be qualified to run again in 2024. For all these reasons, I'll be voting yes on the resolution, knowing that this resolution is not binding and that I will respect whatever decision the Board of Election arrives at.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right, any other comment before we move to a vote? Commissioner Link?
Yeah, I think Commissioner Myers summed it up really well, the difficult position that we're in and the difficult position that the voters of this community, particularly the voters of District 3 and District 2, current and new districts. I just want to dispel any myths in the community that I knew anything about Commissioner Parker's resignation. I found out about their resignation from Commissioner Davenport, who called me the morning that the resignation was made public. It was a shock to me as much as it was to as many members of the public. So anyone out there who's, creating these conspiracy theories about collusion, it simply doesn't exist. I had absolutely no idea that this was coming.
Commissioner Wright?
Yes, I appreciate that we've gotten to this point. I wish we were at this point sooner in the process, but again, this is all uncharted territory again that we find ourselves in. I want to make sure that there's many people in the community who do not have open dialogue with their commissioner, and they tend to reach out to who will listen to them. And so I encourage those in the community to continue doing that. Speak with who you are used to talking to or comfortable talking to, or someone who's going to listen to you. My phone number is 706-549-3518. All of our contact information is on the website. We've had people reach out to us in the last few years because of just a matching perspective or personality to talk to, and that will continue, and I think all of us are ready to help during this time. And I wish the resolution didn't have the date in there, because this is similar to some of our other votes that we had that I disagreed with, telling another entity what to do, but I don't want to muddy the waters with all that. So, I'm going to support this because more needs to be explained in this situation than is typical. I appreciate you mapping all that out, and that we can do a big push at the beginning of the year. Hopefully, March will be the date that the Board of Elections settles on, and that we can do a major community push on the maps and the new boundaries for everybody sooner than but as soon as possible, so that we can capture everybody learning at the same time.
Thank you. Commissioner Denson?
Thank you, Mayor. And just really briefly, I'll say, much like Commissioner Myers stated, I found out that there was, that Commissioner Parker had concerns about and was considering resigning also 3 days before it actually happened, but was led to believe or thought that it was going to happen sometime in the future if it ever happened. It was definitely shocked also when it happened on Monday. So this is something that I think is causing a lot of strife all over the place. This is something that's not benefiting absolutely anyone, and definitely not this body. But I just want to have a quick question and to the attorney, and you can get back to us if otherwise. But so understanding the 180 days limit and stuff, is there any way that, say after the election was set and the election was happening, that this body could appoint an interim up until the seating of the winner of the election?
There's no authority for that.
No? Okay. All right. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Houle?
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the points colleagues have raised up. I think they're all very salient about, the value of this recommendation, but also that ultimately the authority here is with the Board of Elections, and I'm happy to support whatever they decide. I did watch the meeting as well, and I just was hoping that maybe Manager Williams or Assistant Manager Edwards could summarize a bit. There was a lot discussed about the administrative burden, I guess, that would be on election staff in terms of having to get an entirely separate array of equipment and staffing all these things and running, a separate concurrent election and everything. And is there anything that you could share that would just kind of clarify kind of the difference of labor burden between like rushing for a November election versus affording a bit more time?
I'd have to follow up on that. We were present with all of you on Tuesday evening here, and Assistant Manager Jones covered that meeting, and he is on vacation. So I did hear that as well, but I can't speak to it specifically right now.
Well, that meeting was last 2 days ago, Tuesday the 13th. So yeah, I guess, our elections director can probably lay it out better than we could have summarized here anyway, but I thought that was a very informative additional component to all this. So yeah, and with that in mind, I'm, looking forward to supporting this.
All right, so we have on the floor a motion from Commissioner Hamby and a second from Commissioner Myers. All in favor of that motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? All right, hearing none, motion carries. It's unanimous. All right, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn this special called session.
So moved.
All right, I've got a motion from Commissioner Wright and a second from Commissioner Hool to adjourn the special called session. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All right, thank you all, and I'm going to relocate, and we will move into our work session. All right, as the screen is coming down, of course, we have 3 items tonight, all concerning capital projects. 2 that we've had some level of discussion about in the past because they were part of the 2020 SPLOST referendum. First of those will be the space modernization project that involves the new judicial facility and then retrofitting of some other existing facilities. Then we'll talk about the Classic Center Arena's parking deck financing. And finally, we'll wrap with some coming capital projects in the form of the TSPLOST 2023 draft tier funding schedule, for which Robert Cheshire will have a conversation with us. So, Manager Williams, anything else you'd like to say by way of introduction?
Thanks, Mayor. Just at a high level, the escalation, the construction escalation, which is really unprecedented, is hitting us at a time in our history when we're starting some of the biggest public works projects we've ever had. And so I think we wanted to bring this forward to you because it's causing us to rethink maybe our initial approach. And so we want to share with you what that looks like and what the user group's going through. And it has everything to do with, you know, what's the product on the back end going to look like and what's our strategy to get there. So we want to get this in front of you as it's unfolding, and you know, there's more deliberation to come.
All right, thank you, Manager. Again, my name is John Simoneaux. I'm one of the SPLOST project administrators, and I'll be walking through the project concept and site selection criteria for the facility space modernization project, specifically sub-project number 1, the Judicial Center. So agenda and purpose is a little bit twofold. The first is to walk through site selection criteria and project concept before going to public engagement on those, but also to inform the commissioners about the gap between the project funds and the needs of the judicial departments outlined in the updated program. So we'll run through this agenda, go through the history first, then give you an update on the programming process that has been done to date, the current budget, and where we see construction budget going as of the construction of this building. Then we'll give you an introduction to the project concept, site selection criteria, wrap it up with a summary and some next steps. So I threw in the SPLOST project statement in this presentation. I'm not going to read through it, but just want it there for your reference. The same with a lot of this history. I just put a lot of history in here to backtrack to when this project was originally proposed, what that budget was, and how it's progressed over the years. So I won't read through it. I have a summary table on the next slide. But just for some recent project history, in 2020, Ceiling Architects provided a test fit study for the new Judicial Center for 142,000 square feet. And the process that the newly selected architect, Crofton Associates, has been going through is taking that program and reevaluating it. So meeting with all the departments in the Judicial Center that are slated to move to a new facility on those 2 dates on the screen, really doing some in-depth programming with them, figuring out their needs, how they're operating within the current courthouse, how they would operate more efficiently in a new building, and building out that new building program. On June 13th, Crofton Associates delivered that program to us with a total square footage of 172,000 square feet for the entire facility, which is about a 30,000 square foot increase from the one done in 2020. And then the next step after that was we asked Crofton Associates to use their cost estimator to give us some idea of what the project cost would be to build that full facility if we were to build out the full 172,000 square feet. That cost estimate came in around $500 a square foot for building it in 2024, late 2024, which brought us to a total project cost of $140 million. And we'll dive into that a lot deeper here in the next slides, but that's just an intro to the history. This slide just gives you a summary of all the different project budgets to date, what was included in those, where we landed today. So you'll see originally in November 2018, staff recommended a 142,000 square foot building with a budget of $71 million. A parking deck was also included in that with 550 spaces at $11 million and a courthouse renovation of $9.4 million for a total project budget of $92.4 million. And then that iterated over a couple of different mayor and commission meetings. So you'll see the parking was taken out and put into the building budget, and that budget was reduced to $81 million total project. And then the project was combined into one single project. So the the courthouse renovation, the new judicial center, and parking was all wrapped up into one at an $82 million price tag. And then in August 2019, the final approval was made by Mayor and Commission to combine all those projects. So the new building at 142,000 square feet, the courthouse renovation, all associated parking at $77.9 million, which was recommended by the Mayor and Commission during their July 10th, 2019 work session. So that's how we got to the budget today. And then you'll see at that bottom line is where I put in the current program that we have for 172,000 square feet, what the project budget would be for that building, $127 million. And then I went ahead and put an escalation factor on that courthouse renovation. We haven't gotten final numbers from the cost estimator on that, but we tried to account for some escalation to give you an idea of what that cost would look like to come to a total project budget of $140 million. Now for an update on the programming. So as I mentioned, the design team and staff met with the different departments in the Judicial Center that are slated to go to the new one. You'll see all those different departments there on the left. That first column shows the existing square footage that they have in the courthouse, just to give you a frame of reference for what they're working in currently. The middle column shows the 2020 test fit numbers. So when Silling went in and did that test fit, those are the numbers that they landed on. Just one note at the bottom, you'll see it adds up to 145 instead of 142. When our architects went back and looked at their test fit, there was one mathematical error which they corrected, which bumped it up to 145. And then in 2022 program, you'll see the updated numbers based on meeting with all the departments and how those have increased over the past 2 years to take us to 172,000 there at the bottom. A couple of factors that led to that growth in square footage. First one is just that full-time staffing counts have risen since 2020, which would be an expected thing. So in meeting with the departments, figuring out how they're operating currently, how many staff they have, those full-time employee count increased, corrected that mathematical formula, and then the rest are really about kind of building out those support spaces more fully. So the 2020 test fit was just that, more of a test fit, not a detailed programming effort. So when the design team went in and met with the departments and really started building out the spaces to figure out the full need of the judicial departments, there were some areas that they more built out. So for example, the IT suite was not included in that original program. There is a little space in the new program for IT. Some of those building support areas, like the electrical closets and storage closets, were more built out to give us a better picture of what that square footage would be. So now we'll go into the project budget. So as I mentioned a couple of slides ago, the total approved amount was 77.9. Once you take off the top those program management general funds, it comes to 76,342. And you'll see how it's broken down below. We still have 9.2 million allotted for the renovation of the existing courthouse, and then around 44 million for the construction of a new facility. This slide, I just wanted to break out what the full build-out estimated project cost would be as we've gone through for a 172,000 square foot facility. If you take that 172, multiply it by $500 a square foot, you get $86 million. So that brings that, once you roll in all the soft costs and project management fees and design fees into that, it comes to a total project of $127 million. And then with the renovation of the courthouse, which we've bumped up to account for some escalation, it comes to a total of $140 million. And then on the other side of this table is the phased build-out estimated project costs. So we're operating under the assumption that the project budget that has been approved by SPLOST is the only money available for this project. And so, as we highlighted in the last slide, the construction costs that we have allocated are around $44 million. And if you take that $44 million, divide it by 500, that comes to 88,000. So we said approximately a 90,000 square foot facility is what you could build now if you were going to build a whole new facility. And in this right column, we didn't touch that sub-project number 2 cost at all. So as that cost is adjusted, as we get updated numbers on that, if that number rises, it will affect the construction numbers above and reduce the square footage of that facility. So another note, we have around $2 million allocated towards the acquisition of a site. And so if we were to use an Athens-Clarke County owned site, that money could be rolled back into the project budget. This slide, again, highlights that gap between the project program of 172,000 square feet and $140 million. Staff does not know of any funding sources to bridge that gap from our current budget. And so we're operating under the assumption that the Mayor and Commission approved funds of $76 million is our money to work with. And that being the case, we've tried to think of some creative alternatives to work within that budget and still provide a judicial facility that will meet the needs of the different judicial departments. And so we've looked at a couple different alternatives, which I'll run through quickly now, and we're planning on having a follow-up work session in October to do a deeper dive into some of these and hopefully come with more of a recommendation of which one of these we'll look into pursuing more so going forward. So renovation of the existing courthouse, that would be taking the existing courthouse, completely renovating it for judicial functions, as many as we could get back within the existing courthouse, and then moving all other functions outside of the courthouse. And the second one, expand existing courthouse on an adjacent property. The two properties that we've really been talking about are the East Hancock right-of-way, so closing that right-of-way, using it to expand the existing facility and gain more square footage that way. And then the federal building property, which we don't know if that is available for acquisition or not, but that's another property that's been thrown out there and talked about. And then the third point would be build a new building or renovate an existing in a phased approach. So build as much as we can now on a new site and a new facility with the budget that we have, and then look to expand that at a later date when funds become available. So again, we'll walk through all those in more detail at another work session, but just wanted to go ahead and get those in front of you so that you're aware of the alternatives that we're looking into. And now we'll go into the project concept and site selection criteria, which the design team and user group and site selection committee have been developing over the past couple of months. The project concept really provides the basis of design for the design professionals as they move forward throughout design, whatever the size of facility is built, and that has been recommended by the user group. The site selection criteria outlines the different characteristics that the potential sites will be weighed against, and that has been recommended by the site selection committee and the user group. And all these were developed with those budget and square footage limitations in mind to try and keep it so that we can move forward with this process. So first up, I'll run through quickly the project concept. This must-have criteria provides that basis of design, so the minimum criteria that the design would have to meet. Some things to note in here, it's really about accessibility, so making the building as accessible to as many people across Athens-Clarke County as possible. and also making the building secure. So having secure sight lines, having secure access points for staff and the public, and also having different circulation systems for the public, staff, and individuals in custody, which is really just a modern courthouse standard in the design of modern courthouses, is to have those where they're not interacting much within the courthouse building to keep everyone secure. One other note is sustainability is a part of this, so meeting that minimum sustainability criteria of LEED certified or a similar certification. Highly Wanted takes that must-have and builds off of it, so takes it one more step in the design, and these are building out some more outdoor spaces, so having an outdoor covered entry, having an outdoor area for staff to just take their break and have an outdoor space to relax. It also highlights some more acoustical comfort, visual comfort, having access to daylights, having good acoustics within the building, which will obviously be a part of the must-have, but taking that up another notch. And then taking that sustainability to the next level of hopefully getting LEED Silver or a similar certification based on the rating system that we go with. The nice to have takes that one more step, builds in some more amenity spaces to the facility. These would be things that we would aim for once we fit all those must-have and highly wanted that we can. So some of those amenity spaces, such as wellness rooms and a cafe for staff to come and get a quick bite. And then separating departments that it makes sense to separate based on the operational efficiency of the building. Separating out the accountability court as a separate court function instead of having it grouped in with other courts, having it be a separate department with a waiting room and a small conference room in it as well. And then having a higher standard of sustainability than the other two categories. Next up, we've got the site selection criteria. And just a quick orientation on this document, that left column provides some different criteria. And then the other three columns provide the must-have, highly wanted, and nice-to-have characteristics. So the must-have provide the minimum criteria that the site needs to meet. So if the site meets all of these criteria, it will be considered. If it doesn't, then it will not. And then the highly wanted and nice-to-have criteria just up the score of the site as they get more of those categories. So first off, the technical values are more of those design characteristics that need to be present in the site in order to be a viable site for the new Judicial Center. One thing to take into account is property area. So they set a minimum of 2 acres to develop this new facility, and then more room the better to laterally expand that in the future and provide a judicial complex in the future for Athens-Clarke County. Since we can't build that whole facility right now. Some of the others really drive costs, so topography, making sure that the grade variation is lesser will be ideal to avoid retaining walls and such that drive up cost. The same with utility capacity, making sure that the zoning is appropriate for a judicial center or can easily be rezoned. The acquisition approach, as I mentioned a couple of slides ago, if it's an Athens-Clarke County site, that money will be able to be rolled back into the project budget. Some other things surrounding security, so site access, ideally have multiple access points and have a setback from the road. So that's a typical design standard in judicial centers to give some buffer from the road. And then setting yourself up for a sustainability score with the site is another one. And then the community values are more of the soft skills of the site per se, so things that the community sees as valuable when developing this new building based on feedback from user group and site selection committee. The first one, property location, I'll get to that on the next couple of slides with a map that we've developed. But really all of these center around accessibility. So having the building easily accessible to the public, close to multimodal stops, easily accessible from multiple areas of the county, having the site be visible and accessible, so easily visible from the road or at least signage that's visible from the road. And then proximity to associated government agencies that work closely with the courthouse and connection to amenities. So that is kind of wraps up the community values. I'll now roll into the property location here. And when we were originally talking about where this courthouse could be located in Athens-Clarke County, our original thought was, since it's the Athens-Clarke County Courthouse, the must-have should be that is anywhere within Athens-Clarke County. That will give us the most broad picture of where we could put this. But really, as we started to hone in on that with the design team, and we started facing the reality that likely this building will have to be phased in some way, where some functions are coming out of the existing courthouse and some are in a new facility, there really needs to be proximity that's maintained between that existing courthouse and the existing jail as well. And that is to maintain those operational efficiencies for staff that are working in the judicial centers, and also the sheriff's office. Transportation between the jail, the existing courthouse, and this new facility will need to be maintained. And so we honed in on this blue highlighted larger area here, and that represents a 10-minute driving distance from the existing courthouse and jail. And that was really, in talking with the site selection committee, design team, user group, the maximum distance that they felt comfortable that it would be able to be in order to maintain those efficiencies between the different buildings and departments without having them to get in their car and drive 20 minutes to a different facility just to maintain those efficiencies. And then the highly wanted and nice to have narrow in a little bit more on that general boundary. And the highly wanted boundary is that blue outline that you see on there, and that represents a 10 to 15 minute walking distance from the existing courthouse. And so that really brings it in more, hones in on the existing courthouse, having it close by, easily accessible from the existing courthouse to maintain those operational efficiencies. And the nice to have is a 5 to 10 minute walking distance from the existing courthouse again. So it's close by, easily accessible, close to the existing attorney offices and government offices downtown to maintain those operational efficiencies.
So the nice to have gets more points than the highly wanted?
The nice to have gets more points than the highly wanted. That's correct. And so just to summarize that quickly, talked about ad nauseum the large disparity between project budget and the building program, the disparity that exists there, and then walked through the project concept, site selection criteria. The project concept provide the basis of design. The site selection criteria, it will be used to score all the potential sites for the new criteria, or for the new judicial center, sorry. Next steps in this process will be to go out to public engagement for the project concept and site criteria to get the public's feedback on those two documents, as well as some aspects of the program. And so after this work session presentation, early next week sometime, we will post this work session presentation, the site selection criteria, the project concept to the SPLOST website, as well as a survey for folks to give input on the different aspects of the design. And then we'll have 2 public engagement sessions for the public to come and give feedback on. There'll be informal drop-in, drop-out on the project concept and site criteria. And those will be on September 29th and October 1st, so that's a Thursday and a Saturday to give a weekend and a week day for people to come give feedback. And those will both be held at the Doty Street Governmental Building. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we'll have a planned work session to review the alternatives analysis on October 11th. And then the mayor and commission will wrap all that public engagement and all your feedback into the site selection criteria and project concept, bring that before you for approval on November 1st, 2022. And then after that, pending approval, we'll continue along with the site selection process and programming of the building. And now I'll open up for questions, comments.
Thanks, John. I appreciate that. I'm going to get everybody, because I think everybody's probably got some ideas about where this may evolve. And I appreciate staff naturally setting this up so that we're going to come back again at our work session in October, because it's obviously going to take some conversation to figure out where we're going. And as challenging as the cost numbers are, I never thought I'd see a $500 a square foot building in my working life. We were at that point. And so I do want to point out some benefits that we do have, as challenging as this environment is. And one of those is that if we are going to split up some functionality that currently is in a single building, we at least have some publicly owned properties close by. So I would highlight, of course, the property on East Broad Street at Hickory that we've previously had some conversations around. It's across the street from multimodal. But probably even more than that, I would note those two properties that are at the intersection of Doherty and College Avenue that are each about an acre. One is just over an acre and one is just under an acre. And just in terms of interplay with the existing building, if we were to use those, that may provide just some functionality that I think everybody'd benefit from, I guess, and then enhancing that road in the conversation. Want to remind everybody that we already have an agreement with the Athens Downtown Development Authority for a parking facility that would also include some mix of uses, some ground floor commercial, and some mixed income senior residential. And so one contemplation I'd like to place on everybody's mind is that maybe we combine that mission that we've already crafted an agreement around with this mission of having a purpose-built space for contemporary courthouse needs for Superior Court and State Court and others. And since there's a deck already planned as part of that DDA project, we could probably get a higher capacity deck and achieve multiple missions. So just want to lay that out there when you're thinking about the geography. But I know a handful of folks kind of want to extend the conversation, so I'm going to begin with Mike.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. And I was going to ask the mayor to describe the ADDA stuff because we had a meeting on it today. But I think that ought to be listed as an alternative when we go to talk in October. And I know we talked about housing there, but certainly some court functions could. I mean, if you can just picture a courthouse that perhaps would go on a lot that we own that's in front of Indigo, and a parking deck next to it that is financed through a bonding and through the ADDA and through the parking revenues that could include subsidiary office space for the courthouse. I would say this, I understand, and I hope I don't make my court friends mad at me, but I understand the need for the 175,000 square foot now. But I think we ought to be just looking at the 2020 numbers that we started with, because by the time we get this built, I mean, if we build it right, we can build it in such a way that we can add on later at subsequent SPLOST, perhaps, like what we've done with the current courthouse and like what we do with the Classic Center a lot of times. So just, I guess I'm just saying, let's be careful about the square footage and build it with expansion in mind, but we've only got so much dollars, so we need to focus on what we plan for, and the 2020 numbers are kind of what we plan for, I thought. So, but I'm curious about the other alternative and about, this.
Manager Williams, did you want to mention anything about those 2020 footage numbers?
In the parking, if the parking arrangement comes through, then that helps satisfy the parking stuff for the courthouse, so.
Well, you hit on a number of key points, and so just to re-articulate it so folks can catch up with us. John mentioned that, if it is on ACC Gov property, that frees up some funds that we'd otherwise spend on property acquisition that could go towards the courthouse itself. Commissioner Hamby, if there is parking that we can access instead of having, so if you're in the downtown area, then structured parking is going to be required. We just don't have the land. And as you'll hear from Classic Center Executive Director Paul Cramer here in a minute, those costs are pretty excessive too. But I say all that, so if you're able to plan it such, then you can free up dollars that would otherwise be spent to build more square footage. What I've come to understand, and I'll defer to John and our designers, I want y'all to think about the courthouse. There are very highly specialized functions, like a courtroom and the security corridors and elevators that are required to move 3 different sets of people around: the general public, folks in the correction system, and then the judges themselves. So rather than think about this in terms of 2 separate specialized buildings, I think a better way to look at it is maybe 1 specialized building, if we can afford it, and then the other one would be office space, right? So the offices that are generic, that house the people that serve the court functions, if we got to bifurcate this in any way, that might be a more economical way to think about it, if we can afford enough of the core space that's required for the specialized function. And John, is that?
Yeah, that's correct. So in talking with the design team, the main thing to look at when deciding what departments are going to be kept together, what are going to go into the new facility, what would stay, that individual and custody transport really becomes important, because those functions being built into the building cause it to be a lot more complex of a building, as Manager William noted. And so keeping those departments together that have individuals in custody coming up into courtrooms is going to be an important factor.
Well, one of the things I do want us to be cautious of, and I hear what you're saying, Manager Williams, but one of the things that appealed to me about this SPLOST project was the fact that we would have this municipal center where we would have departments that are located throughout this county able to come together into a building that the public could easily access. And so I just want us to be mindful of that and not lose focus of that component.
Totally agree, and that's consistent with what you and, at the time, Commissioner Harrod said from the get-go.
Yeah.
And so let me offer this. No stone will remain unturned in all of this. And, you know, this is what we want to do, is generate y'all's interest and creativity as we struggle as well. I mean, it could be that you just proposed a new building on a different site, and we were qualifying it, but maybe that new building would have the specialized court functions, and then the renovation of the existing courthouse could be more office in nature, and it could house both judicial office as well as municipal office. It could be, and we do have some existing buildings, you know, such as the Costa building and others, that we look at to say, do we have to reshift departments to try and free up? Because y'all have been consistent, you know, Satula, Daugherty are two that you would like to empty out to put back on the tax rolls and use those to entice the type of development this body would like to see. So everything's on the table. We'll just go through different variations of this. But when you think about it, to your point, Commissioner Hamby, it could be that we do build a smaller building than 170,000 square feet. But rather than have some court functions here and some court functions there, now you got two sets of security chain. You know, maybe we try and put specialized together, office separate, and then people can traverse back and forth. So.
Melissa?
Yeah, you know, just going down the cost breakdown, I noticed $6.5 million for furnishings and equipment, and I'm wondering how much of that could be reused. Do we have to junk everything and buy all new, or could some, you know, a couple $1 million be saved in something like that?
That's a great question, and I don't know off the top how much of that can be reused and how much of it would be able to be reused in a new facility. I know that was something that was mentioned on site visits that we took with existing staff, is that some of that furniture is old furniture that is, especially in the historic courthouse, that they like and would love to see be reused in some way. So I don't know the dollar amount that would save, but definitely something that we can look into.
I have a couple other questions too. If we've learned anything from the pandemic, it's that many of us can do our jobs from home. And I know that a lot of corporate entities out there are actually downsizing their physical presence and allowing many employees to work from home. And I'm wondering if that would be a means of saving space, if we transferred more positions, more of the support services into remote positions, that could possibly allow us to downsize this whole project a little bit.
No, that's another great point, and that's something that we asked during the programming sessions of, is it possible to have flex spaces or touchdown spaces where people don't necessarily have to come in every day? It's not their desk, but it's a desk for someone to set up in. So we asked that question, and that should be built into the program as the square footage sits, but definitely worth continuing that conversation.
Okay. And then there's the North Downtown Athens project that's happening almost adjacent to the current courthouse project. And I'm wondering maybe if some of that project could incorporate some of the support service office functions of the court's needs that maybe could save us some money, or The Doherty Street building definitely has potential for, additional floors, and it's still in a pretty close location. I'm just kind of thinking about logistics and how close certain government properties are.
Great points, and as Manager Williams stated, no option is off the table at this point, so we'll definitely look into those options.
Patrick?
Yeah, so we're jumping ahead of ourselves. Pretty much what we've been discussing is just what the judges needed, the capacity, and then later down the road, we'll get into location. But I do just want to caution my colleagues when it comes to two separate buildings, because this is a multi-million-dollar project that we want to get it right the first time and one time. And this is one thing I told the committee is that just separating functions may look good to save money for now, but maybe a hassle 10 years down the road. We don't know what technology is going to happen, but just keeping everybody together seems to be what I get. Seemed to be the feedback that I get from the judges, for operational costs and stuff like that. But I'd rather us to get it right the first time, not so much focus so much on the money, because we can always build out, but find that perfect site that we can build out on, but just get it right the first time and put all the judicial functions together, and so we can have space for our municipal functions.
Tim?
Thank you. And I completely agree with Commissioner Davenport. I am very concerned about if we go with, and I understand the situation we're in, but I think if we go to a less than ideal situation, I guess I'm very afraid that in 10 or 15 years from now, we have the judges back here again asking for us to fix problems that they have because they are separated in multiple buildings or something. So with that being said, I agree with Commissioner Hamby on the using of the 2020 numbers. I understand that the escalating demand for more space, and that's probably going to continue. Probably by the time we're actually constructing it, they're probably going to be wanting an extra 10,000 square feet too. But I think that this is obviously a bad time for us to be expanding the size of the building that's being asked for when we are in such a tight budget. I'm glad to hear that all the different funding sources possibly are on the table, all things being considered. I will say in the short term, one thing, and I know this is on top of the courts asking us for some of the ARPA funds too. I know at the jail they have a courthouse built in that is not being utilized. Many of us went and toured it, saw it there. The sheriff has told us that it's basically never used. And of course, it also has virtual phone-in capabilities too. And it helps a lot with the safety issues of transporting inmates and such too. So I really think if it's such a dire situation happening right now, which it sounds like it is, I think that's something that we should be utilizing immediately to help with some of this demand. So that's something in the short term, and in the long term, I still really like the Hickory Street location, especially if we can still find a way to be able to build off of the potential parking partnership over there. So.
Carol.
Yeah, I look forward to the creative solutions that you all are going to bring forward to us. I would also say that with the spaces that were just discussed that were closer to the Hotel Indigo and the Federal Building, in some ways, if that was there and we were renovating the courthouse for use, to me it would feel like a campus environment where people walk from buildings to buildings. It's all very close. I go down on Hickory Street a lot. I am amazed already at the amount of traffic, not on Hickory Street, but on Broad Street going down there. And every time I go through, I'm like, oh, this is going to be fun if there's a courthouse here. It has changed dramatically in terms of the cars. That used to be a street that, you could almost pull on without like looking to see if there was any traffic. You cannot do that anymore. There are cars there all the time. So I am, I'm enchanted by the idea of having it downtown with a little campus, but I look forward to what you present us.
Jesse?
Yeah, I have a few hopefully quick questions and then a thought or two. One is, how much of the $140 million building budget is for a parking structure? I see that it was originally 11.4 million that got wrapped in, but now we're talking about more square feet. Does that also mean more for parking cost
So
escalation?
it wouldn't include a parking structure, it would include surface parking on
Okay.
the site.
And has the ship totally sailed on Hickory Street and like a parking agreement with the Classic Center because the Classic Center is moving forward, or is that something that?
I mean, that still is a prospect.
Okay, I mean, I'll just throw out there that, we keep seeming to want to like honor this process of site selection, that it seems is going to lead us to something at that location or extremely nearby, not practically in like a totally different part of town. So it seems to me like the sooner the better to try to line something up to hopefully save a lot of money for this county on a parking agreement. I know that some efforts for that in the past didn't work out for different reasons, and that's fine, but if there's still something that can, that to me makes a lot of sense. I guess I'm also curious just what the budget figure would be if we stuck with 142,000 square feet instead of upgrading. Do you have that figure on hand? Or?
I do not have it on hand, but if you multiply 142 times 500,000, that'll give you the construction cost, or times 500. So the building cost would be around 71 million, and then there would be project funds on top of that.
Yeah, it's on slide 12.
On slide 12.
I believe that's for the 172,000 square foot.
Yeah, that's for the 172,000, right?
Yeah.
So it would be less than that for 100 if we stuck with the original square
It would
footage,
be less
right?
than that, yes.
Yeah. So I guess that kind of brings me to my thought, which is, I'd like some more details around the justification for the dramatic square footage increase. Like, we get a lot of this must-have and nice-to-have, and, having a breakdown of what we're hearing from these different constitutional officers. I mean, I'd just be curious how much of their request is, for everybody to have their own decently sized office, and, maybe there's a way that the must-have is for some more shared working space, or some other, creative workarounds like some colleagues have suggested. The other thing I'd just like this body to consider is, the supposed need for a growing court is directly related to the quantity of people we're running through a criminal punishment system, and we keep finding more complicated ways to punish more people. Like, that's a statewide and national trend, and I think if we continue to invest as a community in alternatives, things that don't necessarily keep people in court as long or in court at all, we might not see the kinds of projections or, the needs that we're currently seeing. With these ever escalating costs, I just think there might be like some cost savings we could consider before we end up kind of repeating the same phenomenon. We built a courthouse at the jail on the premise that we'd use it, and we're not. And I'm just, worried that we're going to do the same here. I guess with that in mind, maybe it would be useful if like the constitutional officers that are involved, in this building, like if they could maybe send a delegation, like if the chief judge and a couple of the other folks, the DA and the sheriff could be here, maybe we could kind of hear from them and talk through some of this if that's possible to work out. Or if not, to at least get that maybe relayed in a bit more detail. And then just the last question I have is about the design of this building, because when I think courthouse, I think of the current courthouse, which is pretty ornate. There's a kind of majesty there that I'm not sure is a must-have. And I'm just curious, like, is that cost per square foot anticipating a similar design, or is it anticipating maybe a more, humble, less fancy design?
That's a great question, and that we didn't look into a lot of the design characteristics of the building, so I'd have to verify that with the design team. I don't know if you know off the...
No, we didn't take into consideration, a specific style or design when we came up with the budget. I mean, it was based on the square footage that was required for a facility, so it didn't necessarily dictate that it would be, columns out front or anything like that.
And it was based on courthouses in the Georgia area is what the cost information was based on.
Okay. Well, I'd just like us to maybe consider that the average cost of courthouses is probably for courthouses that look more ornate than maybe our courthouse needs to look, and maybe there's some cost savings to be realized there as well.
And if you could repeat what was said from the audience, because it doesn't get picked up on the recording, number one, and, so-
Yeah, do you want to say it, Arthur?
Sure, I can.
Anybody speaking should use the mic.
Sorry. No, there was no specific design encountered or preconceived with regards to the budget. The budget was based on the square footage of the needs of the courthouse. And it's based on, like John said, historical data that we've got from other courthouses around Georgia.
Okay, and our other before I go pretending like I know, is it accurate to say that most courthouses around Georgia look similar to ours in terms of design?
There's not a pre-conscribed, design. I mean, obviously, a lot of the environment and where the building is built takes into account the looks of the facility. We've done facilities that take on a more modern look as opposed to a more traditional court-style building. So there really, again, is no limitation on that. And again, it doesn't really prescribe the budget that we've got, set aside for the construction.
Okay.
Introduce yourself.
I'm sorry, I'm Earl Smith when I'm with Crofton Associates,
The architect.
architect.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Earl. Thank you.
And Mayor, I'll just add one
Mike?
more thing, if you don't mind. And just to emphasize, a courthouse isn't just mainly for criminal functions. I mean, there's so much that goes on in courthouses. Divorce.
Got married in one.
Yeah, there you go. Divorces, marriages.
Got divorced in one also.
Adoptions. I mean, okay. I don't know what to say there, but adoptions and so anyway, just to emphasize, there's more than just criminal activities that are going on. And I have a sneaking suspicion that when we build something as our new courthouse, it's not going to look like the Jackson County Courthouse or some of the other ones out there. But I think it'll be tastefully done and economically done for our community.
Carol?
Yeah, just two questions for you and the manager review. Back when you presented that idea of downtown, that was sort of new to me, that the downtown development, there was something about a parking deck in there. Could you
Yes.
just review that, and then I had
I'd be
another
glad
question.
to. So the agreement that currently stands between the unified government and the Downtown Development Authority is that the Development Authority was provided the opportunity to develop a mixed-use building with a parking facility on Jackson Street. And that was anticipated to include some ground floor commercial or potentially arts-oriented space, along with somewhere in the ballpark of 100 or 120 senior-focused mixed-income residential units. And the notion in that building was that we would have somewhere around 550 parking spaces, but the designer for that project, in a preliminary way, has said that given that parking spaces or parking decks, whether they're wrapped by other functions or standalone, really are this sort of expandable accordion. So, what you would do for 550 spaces, you could expand to 750 or 850.
And that's on that space just to the right of the Hotel Indigo, right?
Yes. So if you're standing on Doherty looking at Hotel Indigo, it's
Okay.
to the right. And so that was the initial plan. But again, I think as staff has said, we need to turn over every stone.
And then the second thing, and this can get this information afterwards, Commissioner Denson mentioned the use of the courthouse out at the jail. I know there's a lot of space at the jail that is not presently being used. Can we get a summary of how much is there and what any plans there are for that use, or maybe it's all being planned for so far? So I know it hasn't all been built out, so how much of it isn't being used and what the plans are? I just want to make sure we're using that public space as well. Does that make sense?
Jesse?
Yes, one last question is about the number of parking spaces we're thinking we need for this. I'd love to get some more information on just how we've arrived at that figure, because, we've been talking a lot about, redesigning some of our parameters around parking requirements, generally speaking, and redesigning a lot of our infrastructure to include more alternatives alternative forms of transportation and, use of public transit. So, are there also maybe cost savings to be realized by just reducing the overall number of spaces we think we need, considering we're building a facility that we're expecting to be used for many decades to come?
All right, many stones will be unturned and turned over in the next month, and we look forward to the repeat conversation.
Looking forward to it as
All
well.
right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate that. All right, not too far flung from where we just began is a conversation we're going to have now with Classic Center Executive Director Paul Cramer, responsive to the need for parking at the Classic Center, and also responsive to our interest in our partner organizations, raising the wage floor. Paul and his team have looked at some opportunities for additional revenue that would meet both those goals. And so Paul's going to talk a little bit about that, and we'll have some time to talk about where we might see those elements going. Just a second here.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. If I am okay to jump into this, I'll get us started. Thank you very much for allowing me some time to talk about this tonight. This is really going to be focused on the Hickory Street deck, but I do want to say that the Classic Center clearly heard the Mayor and Commission a couple sessions ago, and I probably need to start out this way by saying when we started on the venture to build the arena, we talked many times to this body, and this body from the very beginning made a few things very clear, that if we were to move the arena forward, that they really wanted to make sure sustainability was a big part of that, and that solar panels were going to be installed and looked into, and every rock would be uncovered as we began to think through that. And subsequent to that, we talked many, many times about the wages that would be paid and the example that the Classic Center would set as we move forward in this initiative. And I just wanted to say that your words were not wasted, and hopefully tonight you will see where we're willing to put that into action as we move forward. I think we have, throughout this project, been extremely creative with thinking about different ways that we can make all of this work, and hopefully you'll see some more of that tonight. So our purpose is to request your approval of a Hickory Street deck, and I'll get into the reasons why that becomes so important. Well, maybe I'll say it here just quickly. When we designed the arena, it was designed with an entrance that had an elevated plaza. The exiting of that plaza to the west would be going out to Foundry Street, as it's at that Foundry Street elevation. But to the east, we've always designed this assuming that the Hickory Street deck would be there, and that is how people would get off the pedestrian plaza. When we did all of our public comments and public meetings, you remember of which there were many, that idea of connecting downtown to the river really became very important to the public. Secondly, we wanted to inspire additional development of the TAD, and I think you're going to be really impressed when you see the development in and around this arena project. When the public puts that first step forward, it's amazing how the private sector will come and wrap around that, and I think you'll see a good bit of that. Provide for a joint use of a parking deck. These decks are expensive, and we need to make sure that if we're putting them in a spot that it isn't one purpose, but it is multi-purpose, and again, you've asked for that as we look at this. plan of the finance will review with you and then request for approval of this final bond that would wrap this up and allow us to move the project forward. Tonight, I'm really kind of proud to be able to say to you that there are a number of things that have sort of evolved as this project has moved forward. We do have a development group who is very interested in building out a senior living arrangement, which would be envisioned just to the south of our current parking deck, over our auto bridge, right by the Performing Arts Theater. There would be a hotel condo concept, which would evolve over the top, still allowing us to access our current parking deck. And then the hotel on the site that you've provided us across Hickory Street would bring another 200 units. And then the site that we discussed Tuesday could actually support 300 units and allow us to bring more dollars into that TAD area. And we've talked to the developer about making at least 25% of those units workforce housing, which was also a very important component that you asked us to consider and think about as we were looking at all of this. And then what we envision currently is a 500 space parking deck. 200 of those units would be shared with the hotel, and then the other 300 directly for the use of the arena, which oddly enough is the exact number that we originally put in the SPLOST as we envisioned this project. And still it would allow for an expanded deck should the courthouse be located at that site as we go forward. Originally, we talked about some of the benefits of making this public investment, that there would be, visitor spending, which would drive roughly $33 million annually, plus new hotel room nights that would come in as a direct result of the visitation, and then the tax revenues and jobs, obviously, that would unfold as well. But the part that was impressive to me, if you were looking at those little subsets of numbers, just with what we know about is coming in right now, we're talking about $240 million of new development that will come in and around this new arena, which will generate $1.25 million annually in your new tax allocation district, which is directly inspired by the public investment of the arena going into that area. And that's every year, that $1.25 million. So to give you a little broader context of how this lays out, you see the arena kind of in the center, and if you look to the left, you would have new housing coming in, some of which would be at a workforce housing price. You would have the hotel, which is just on the other side of Hickory from the arena, the parking deck, and then you still have that ACC tract of land, which comes out on the East Broad and Hickory, which could be the courthouse, or if not, I think it is a very attractive site, and we would likely see a private development want to go into that site as well, which again could partner with that deck so that you wind up with 3 people utilizing that deck, which is really important when we're spending the kind of funds that we are. Something we see where the senior condo site is and the auto bridge site, but the newest developer has also reminded me that air rights that we obtained as a part of building the arena is a very attractive site for them to be able to develop additional things on, and I will be getting all of that in the next couple of days, but I will just tell you they're super excited about the possibility of what can go over the top of that rail line, the way that we secured those rights. This is a commitment that if we can make the financial piece work that I'm about to unfold, that we would commit as an authority, not just the arena, but the arena, the convention center, performing arts theater, all of our employees would start out at $15.85 an hour. And you'll see where I have funds that would enable us to do that. So as we look at this site, what you would get out of this, you would get the Classic Center wage enhancements. You would get that very important connection between downtown and the river, which I would say is going to continue to inspire future growth in that area. It's designed to be at that same elevation, which solves this, how do we get the egress out of a building that has 7,000 people in it in both directions the way that it was originally designed. A deck that exists at Hickory that can also exit not only on Hickory but also on Willow. We're designing that in from the beginning. Why I pause on that and why that's so important when it's connected with the arena is if you don't have enough methods of egress to get out of that deck on a large facility like this, people will sit in that deck for sometimes 30 to 40 minutes trying to get out of the deck. So we have thought about that from a customer perspective. We've also designed this deck so that it has a podium slab and you can build on top of it. Something that I would say should be thought about as you're thinking about maybe a judicial center and then maybe office space in another area. Once you build the top of that, it would become very easy to build on top of that deck because the structure has been thought through from the get-go. Possible shared use of the deck between the Classic Center, the hotel, and really whatever develops just to the south of that deck. And then the bottom east side of this deck would be ideal. I know Melissa Link has talked to me about this many times for a bike rental shop that could access the Firefly Trail or a climbing wall or some form of entertainment right down there by the backside of the deck. I put this picture in just to bring you up to speed. I'm sure you don't drive by it every day, but I look at it every single day. And this arena is moving forward at a very rapid rate now. Took us a while to get out of the ground, I'm not going to lie. The rock had to be dealt with. But at this point, you can see just from this image, the foundations are going in as we speak. And this is moving along quite rapidly, and it needs to in order to hit our completion date. But there are some decisions, mainly this egress idea that has to come about, and it really has to come about, I would say, by November, because we're going to be at a go, no-go point. And I want to describe for you really the three options we have of egressing this venue. In option A, which is my ideal thing, which I hope you will support, is that we egress the way that we always intended to. There would be a bridge that crosses Hickory that would go to the top of the parking deck, and the parking deck would be outfitted with both scissor stairs to get a large volume of people down to the Hickory Street level very, very quickly, and it would have handicap accessibility elevators along with the right-sized elevators so that we can put bicycles in there so they can bring their bikes all the way down to the river. That would be the ideal way to do it. Option B would be to simply build the bridge across Hickory Street and build the stair and elevator shaft, but not to build the parking deck at this time. And design that in such a way that the parking deck could come back sometime in the future. Option C is we keep everything on the west side of Hickory Street, but what you would be doing is building this appendage directly at the main forefront of the arena that we have put all of this thought into from the very beginning. You could exit people directly down in front of the multimodal transportation center and on to the rather narrow sidewalk right there. But it could be done, and you could keep everybody just on that west side. The reason I'm saying this decision has to be made, if these options C or B are going to be done, we need to know so that we put the footings in as those foundations are being laid right now. And we purposefully started on the north end and worked our way south to give us more time for you to make this decision as we go.
Blaine, did you want to make a point about the capital
you mind?
project?
Yes, no, go right ahead.
So I want to explain this. Once explained, it's fairly simple to understand. So you think about a building with this many people in it, and if there's an emergency, then they have to exit the building. The original design contemplated a parking deck across the street, and even going back to the concepts that were shown from the get-go, there was this, bridge that crossed. So the building was designed with this stair outside of the building, okay? So it takes up, I guess, less expensive space on the outside than it would on the inside. So that building was already designed, and then the parking deck got value engineered out. But we still have a life safety requirement to have adequate and wide stair access, elevator access to get out of the building. So where the option C, when the parking deck got value engineered, we're like, well, if you have to build that stair just on the outside of the building, what does that look like? And so there is no bridge across to the parking deck, and it all happens right there, and it's not ideal. And, the cost is still considerable. So I think we go into this, go ahead.
I think it's fair to say it's a little over $2 million just to build that little appendage in front of the arena.
And the bridge stair version of that's, double, but you get the connection to the parking deck. So as you think about this, really the question is, if there's ultimately going to be a parking deck there, it's going to be more economical to put
Do
the
it
bridge
now.
in. And that's where we are with the construction of the building proper, is that the contractor needs to know the porta footings and stuff like that. So we're having to accelerate this decision, and understand what might go there, so we can get them oriented. And Paul will talk about this. We're trying to segment the decision points on this so that we can limit the exposure in case you change your mind at some point in the future. But this is one decision that, as Paul said, we'll probably need on November 1st.
So nothing if not creative. I was challenged with really thinking this through. The site that we have to build this parking deck is a difficult site. It has slope, it has rock, it has water retention. There's a lot of issues out there. So we have gotten very good order of magnitude numbers, and to build this deck at this site is roughly $45,000 per parking space. My proposal is to build 500 of those parking spaces for a total of $22,500,000. Some of the current funding sources that we have, if we were to do this property swap discussed the other day, there could be $2.8 million brought forward from a developer. The current bond, the last bond that we just approved, had an additional $2 million on it, which could be used for this purpose. And then upfront funding from the hotel partner, this would be their paying into this parking deck, 2.6. And then upfront from the rail line building out over the top of that, additional funding that would come in. So the amount left to be financed of the deck would be $14.2 million. And if we assume the same basic rate and duration that we received on the last bond, that would mean that we would need $807,000 a year to pay for that just for the deck. And then the increment from where we are now, paying our staff and going forward, to make the commitment to you of $1,585, we would need an additional $523,760 a year, which means we would require $1.3 million a year to make this work. We do know that the land lease, the way that we've set up the others, would drive $450,000. The TAD, we'd be asking you to consider providing 25% of the tax allocation district for this deck, understanding 75% would still be available for community needs. Also understanding I've only calculated that 25% on the new development which has come about directly as a result of the arena itself. Largely it gets paid for by the new development that came in and around. The special district, which you'll recall we talked about before, does add a bit more revenue to come in, the air rights over the rail line, the hotel parking itself, and then the additional parking that the Classic Center Authority would have. And I know Mike is in the parking business with the Downtown Development Authority. I just want to remind you, in the very first bond, there was $450,000 annual revenue stream coming in, because at that time, we were convinced we were going to build the deck then. So this 187 is on top of that 450 that my team still feels we can generate with the deck that we're putting in. So all of that does give us sufficient funds, not only to cover the annual debt, but gives us a little cushion, which is required when you go to take these bonds out. And even if the tax allocation district did not come through, then you're about $56,000 annually away from making this work, which, as developers come into this area, I think we're going to wind up picking that up going forward. I do want to go on to the next. Now it's not allowing me. There we go. Budget information, you can see Mayor and Commission would be asked to provide us with that tract of land we spoke of the other day. Mayor and Commission would be asked to back the bond of the $14.3 million to finish off the deck. Bond payments would come from all of those revenue streams we just spoke of. The assumption is that we would capitalize the interest again through May of 2026, giving us an opportunity to ramp that business plan up. We, of course, would agree to cover the bond payments, agree to manage the deck, and agree to paying the $15.85 an hour. And then under the timeline, I would ask the authority to formally adopt the resolution to move that forward and bring that forward to you in November. And November, we would ask for you to move those things forward. We do understand, even if you say yes in November, it's going to probably be April by the time the bond closes and all of the TAD decisions could be made, which would be sufficient time for us to begin construction in May, so that we would have a 10-month window, so the deck would finish at the same time the arena does, and the egress would not be an issue going forward. So next steps would be, 1, to transfer the property, 2, to actually move forward with the idea of the TAD, and then approval of the bonds so that we could start construction post-haste and finish it in time to coincide with the arena. So I think this is one of those very rare opportunities where you have the chance to build the deck and have 1 and 1 actually equal 3, and have many partners and allow us to live up to our obligations that I think you all wanted us to do from the very beginning. So I'll open it to questions.
Mike?
Sure. Thank you, Paul. Thank you. You obviously put a lot of thought into this, and as you always do with a lot of the presentations and requests that you make of us. I will say this. I certainly like what you've put together here, and I, as it stands right now, I don't have a problem with the 25% going to the Classic Center, because y'all are the ones doing the work to generate the $240 million that we're going to realize down there. I'll also say this too, we own the Classic Center. We own everything around the Classic Center. And, and I think the wages part I agree with, and I appreciate you doing that. But, at the end of the day, it could have been on us to increase the monies that we give to Paul from the general fund if we wanted more wages. But Paul has found a way to do it without us having to do that. So I'll just say that. I mean, if we were requesting you to pay people more, we should have been giving you more money.
I appreciate it. It's nice when we can work it out the other way.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Either way, it gets, as my dad says, it all comes out in the wash. I don't know what that means, but whatever.
Carol?
Yeah, first I want great presentation. Can you send us the updated presentation? Because what we have and what's online is different than what we saw here.
It is, and I apologize
So,
about that.
well, you just kept thinking and working
Yes,
on this,
ma'am.
so which is great. Can you go back to that slide with the project funding on it? On that, and I just wanted, a couple of things I just wanted to understand better here.
Sure.
One is down with the annual allocations to support the bond. That special district is one of those special districts we've heard about, but we have not yet voted on that.
We
Did we vote on
We have
it?
not voted on it. What's contemplated, though, there was at first talk about, I think all the hotels maybe being subject to it. Then we decided it would only
Right.
be the three properties that are being developed in conjunction to provide revenue for the arena project. That is the hotel, the senior condo, and the hotel/condo.
That's correct.
And so we're in the process right now. We just got the last piece of property. Those property, they've been working with planning, Paul's attorneys have, to get those properties subdivided out so that once those properties get recorded as separate parcels, we can move forward with that process. It's still subject to your approval, the commission's approval of creating that special district for those properties.
What we had
When
talked
do we
about was
expect?
just adding 2 mills to each one of those.
Right, when do we expect to do that?
Well, I just got, literally the mayor signed one of the plats today as part of the last plat today, so I'll be reaching out to then Trip Bridges, the Class Center Authority's attorney will have to send me, get the deeds recorded to allow that, to put those properties, I've already approved those properties being conveyed to the Class Center Authority for purposes of generating revenue for the project. So I'll probably be reaching out to Dan, McCrae. He's agreed to help us with that. He did the special tax district for the Braves project. And so I'll be reaching out to him to talk about when he thinks we might be able to get that done. I don't think it's that involved, so maybe January?
Okay, but that's part of the financial analysis that
Yeah.
we're
But I think
including in here for the paying of
We are.
this
So
bond that we're talking
we
about.
did talk about it quite extensively when we did the last
Right,
bond.
right. No, I do
And
remember that.
just as a reminder, it is in the bond that we just finished.
we didn't put it in there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because it wasn't done, so we didn't put it in there. We can't put something that's, but
And-
there seemed
yeah.
to be a consensus of support, though, from the commission when moving forward in that limited way of doing it. And so,
Right.
yeah, but we didn't put it in the bond deal.
And then the air rights of the rail, could you explain that one again to me? So that's
Sure.
a new concept for me.
I can do it better if I go back to the image.
Okay.
Well, actually, this is not a bad image to show. We purchased, in order to build the arena, the air rights of the rail line from East Broad all the way up to Strong Street. which effectively means we can build over or under that rail line. And currently, you'll notice the rail has been removed so that we can build the arena, and then we're required to put it back. But if you really look at this topography, there's a considerable amount of land that you can build over that rail line all along the Founder Street warehouse and all the way out to East Broad Street. So currently, our developer is thinking about building adjacent to our existing parking deck between our deck and the multimodal transportation center, and doing it with a podium slab so they can build something on top of that. All of that would be something that we can charge an air rights lease and gain revenue that can help us pay for this deck.
So it's back to that slide, it's more of what we're talking about. So it's just,
More annual lease
it's
revenue.
more lease
It's just
space.
more revenue.
It's just hanging out over there.
That's
Has to
correct.
be a certain thing. Then the last thing is back, actually, this is good, just to get me up to track. On the Otterbridge site and the senior condo site and where's the hotel? And the hotel, have you signed contracts or understand memos?
We have
legal
had-
arrangements on those yet?
We have had one very formal, we went out for bid, and we had two bidders, and we have one that we have advanced to the next level. They have taken the last month and a half and prepared a new master plan of all of these sites, and they are going to next week provide us with the master plan and the actual amount that they will pay for each one of those
Oh,
developments
so
along the way.
one, all three sites? One?
One developer
one
for
develop-
all of these sites, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Melissa?
Yeah, the parking deck here is an inevitability. I mean, there's no question that it's, I mean, in my mind, kind of a necessary evil. In an ideal world, everybody would be hopping on transit. But, you know, it's definitely necessary, and regardless of whether the courthouse goes there or some other entity, some other corporate entity or whatever happens with the courthouse or the judicial center, there's going to need to be a parking deck there. The only thing that gives me pause about the whole scheme is that 25% of the TAD. In my mind, that TAD was created to give direct benefit to the community in need in the immediate area, the people of East Athens. We expanded that TAD border so it could include East Athens and directly benefit that underserved community. So I would like to see some other means of finding those funds, or at the very least, greatly reducing that portion, you know, maybe more like 10% or 12%. So we can assure that the most possible funding can be poured directly back into that community. And I understand that the kind of trickle-down revenues from the arena and all the adjacent development does come into our overall tax revenue that can then be transferred. But I really feel like with that TAD, we need to have that direct benefit to that community in need.
So I do feel the need to say two things about that. One, if it weren't for all of those other developments that only came about because of the arena, there wouldn't be nearly as much revenue in the tax allocation district to begin with. You know, if not for that development, you wouldn't have the revenue to begin with.
I mean, I understand that.
And secondly, while the tax allocation revenue can only go to pay for the deck, I do want to make it clear that this overall financial package is allowing us to step out in faith at that 15.80 whatever an hour. And that is going, I can tell you, to many of the residents in the East Athens area that do work at the Classic Center today and will work there as we go forward tomorrow. So for whatever that's
Yeah,
worth.
I mean, I do understand that. I'm just not sure the general public would understand that. It would be
understand.
really nice to be able to put a really awesome community center or, you know, infrastructure improvements in East Athens and be able to say this was directly paid for with the TAD.
Tim, no, Jesse.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, for this presentation and the creative ways to find funding. If you're looking for some extra work, we have this courthouse project, maybe.
I was afraid of that.
And I definitely appreciate you getting creative to find the 1585. Like Commissioner Link said, I mean, the thing that definitely gives me a pause is the TAD percentage. I do understand that I completely get the argument of, you know, how it's going to be creating more revenue. And so what I want to see, my fear here is more so of a slippery slope of that we've designated 25% of it to this. We move forward with that. Then we have 75% left. Then some other project comes along and we dedicate another percentage of that. And before we know it, we've given away this whole bucket that, yes, was supposed to go towards community benefits. So where I'm at, and I'm prepared to work on this, is that I am willing to go ahead and agree to this and approve this if we lock in through whatever kind of legal mechanism we need to a percentage of that TAD to go specifically to community benefits that cannot be moved around in the future for Classic Center projects or any other kind of projects like that. And I'll say specifically, because again, that was actually written into, of course, the SPLOST project, and something I was pushing for a long time around childcare. And I understand you're not in the childcare business, as I think we spoke and that you said, and that is correct. But what I think something I would be happy with doing instead, and I think it would get us there, would be if whenever we go ahead and make this agreement with the TAD, that we also say that we're going to say 8%, 10% is going to be locked into an affordable child care fund for the people of East Athens, something like that, where we have a mechanism that we are guaranteeing. At the same time we're guaranteeing 25% of this will go to the Classic Center, we're guaranteeing another percentage of this is going to go to one of these things that we promised the people of East Athens when we approved this SPLOST project. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Jesse?
Well, I want to say, I'm certainly willing to work with that. We'll need to check with Mr. McCray to make sure that how we could use the TAD funds for, whether we can use them to provide affordable childcare.
Sort of another way, just
Yeah.
trying to get at the same goal, could be to direct the TAD advisory group to highlight other areas of need. And one of the things that is important to remember is that the TAD dollars do have to pay for capital costs, so it has to be construction things. And so that could be a request that's delivered to the TAD advisory group in concert with this.
Yeah, I guess my thing is I want something a little bit stronger than, right, because what we're talking about here with this 25% wouldn't be, it's going to be.
For the next 20 years.
Yes. And so I would want something equally concrete that provides, whether maybe, I know we're building out a lot of other, we're going to have that residential workforce housing unit, which with like downtown building, should have ground floor, retail space. So maybe a component of it is that we go ahead and designate that will be a subsidized, childcare center or something. Since it has to be capital costs, but some way to get there. We've been very creative up to this point. I feel like we'd be creative to get that.
Definitely, in terms of process, just remember, what we're doing is we're asking them to contemplate something, and then they've got to return to us. So we're still many months away. So, Jesse?
Thanks. Yeah, so many questions. I'm trying to hone. But I have to admit, I think I might be getting excited about this project finally.
Praise God.
So, and my first question, I love the wage being wrapped into this. In a sector that so rarely pays a living wage, I think we need to underscore that, we're constantly hearing about retail, service industry, and hospitality as the sectors that never pay a living wage. And this is a proposal for us to maybe do something that can have a domino effect on that sector in the whole community, but certainly at least does right by the people who are working for this public entity. So that has me very excited. I did want to just dig in. I think I heard you correctly saying that would be for not just the arena, but all employees of the Classic Center?
That's correct.
Part-time and full-time?
Correct.
Okay. And I am curious if it's going to come with some kind of wage structure policy that ties to a mechanism, if not the MIT living wage calculator, then something like that, because I know that's something, and, you know, for like some history, for maybe everyone's benefit, I'm sure you remember, Paul, like, Classic Center was ahead of the county at raising to a living wage floor years ago. And then, of course, the MIT living wage calculator moved up in accordance with the highly and quickly escalating cost of living here in the community. And now we're kind of back at it again. And it's exciting to see the Classic Center now actually level up above the county again with this proposal. You know, we're at 1560 and you're talking about 1585. But I'm just curious, you know, to kind of, does this come with something that avoids us having to kind of revisit this conversation every 5 years in terms of a policy for the institution?
I mean, I'd love to say absolutely yes, but I
Yeah.
think we need to look at this on an annual basis and see where we are.
Okay.
You raised a really good point that most people in our industry are not at this area, and it's not because they don't want to, right? It's because convention centers historically don't make money. I know we can do this with the proposal that we have outlined, and I'm honored and proud to be able to do it. I think we just need to work together. Mike's point, I think, is a very good one. You own the Classic Center. You own the arena. You own everything around it. And I'm happy to work with you to continue to provide something we can all be proud of. But I think it has to be looked at annually.
Okay. And then, do we have an update? I don't know if this is from you or the mayor, but there was that committee that was wrapped into the IGA around the parking deck, and there were a couple of labor representatives appointed to it. Has that committee met on this, or, you know, just if and how they've been looped in? I'd be curious for an update on that.
They did meet on it when we looked at the hotel and when we looked at the developer, and they spoke to them at length about what their plans were. They actually voted to go with the developer that we are currently pursuing. Though it is not final yet, they have been intricately involved with that process, yes.
Okay. And my understanding, I don't know if we'll get this in a report later when we're considering that, but my understanding is that, you know, those folks are looking at not just wage floor, but also other things around contracting practices, the practices of the contractor. So I'd be interested in knowing what we've heard, especially from those members of that committee. I guess I'll stop at this one for now, although if we could go around a little more, I might have another question or two, or I'll just email them. But you talked about the three egress options, and you kind of made your personal pitch, the one with the nicer picture, you know, is faster. And I'm just curious, is there a difference in speed of egress? Do we have an estimate roughly of how much of a difference? Because I thought the point about safety that Manager Williams brought up to me is really important.
Any of the three have to allow for the egress and the speed of egress. Any one of these three would work. Otherwise, the architect wouldn't design them as such.
But does option A work better, or is it functionally the same in terms of speed? Just where you get emptied out on isn't as good.
I would say that option A and B, probably the speed of egress is roughly the same.
Okay.
Because you still have that same length of runway to get to the stair before you go down. I would say that option C is probably going to be a tad slower, just logically looking at it.
Okay. And then, you know, just one final thought when we're thinking about how to fund things moving forward. I know this would require state approval, but, you know, we ran through the hotel motel tax thing, and we didn't have luck last time around, but a lot of us, including some state representatives, went to Tuscaloosa, and it was very enlightening to learn that their combined state and local hotel motel tax is 15%, the local portion of that being 11%, and they raised it from 9 to 11, a 2% raise, to fund the riverfront development that we basically went to Tuscaloosa to see. So I don't know how much that impressed upon everyone in the room the way it did, I think, some of us on this body. But when we're talking about how to try to fund things moving forward and the struggles of escalating costs, maybe that's another option we can try to revisit.
I would highlight that we should encourage those state representatives who are on that trip to heavily engage with their colleagues. I think that's probably the critical entry point. Carol?
Yeah, back to these pieces here, the financing that you presented to us is for option A.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, which, right now makes more sense to me. Second thing, the TAD advisory group, they met in the beginning of September. Are you on their agenda for October to sort of give a review of this or anything?
Not until you all, I think, direct manager that that's where we want to go going forward, but Blaine, I'll let you speak to that.
As, with respect to the timeline,
Well, I just was, we're
We're
I
running
would
out
like
of time.
there, I mean, some of us have qualms here. There's a group there that's set up. It would give us another perspective, the people who are actually doing it, and it'd give them a heads up, a respectful heads up of this is something we're considering rather than, so as we consider it, they consider it.
And so the motion would be to direct the TAD group to look at that component.
Right, and just
then
see
that would
if they
return to
have
us as
any.
a recommendation, much
Right.
like a SPLOST advisory group.
Exactly, because I would, it would be a challenge to the whole TAD system to have this get to them, and then it's like, the commission is taking away 25%. Like, I'd like to have them in the process with us.
And that's specifically what we're doing. But we do not have the process that, allows this body to unilaterally take it away prior to their
Right.
review. So what we would be doing is asking for their review.
But now, when would we, because, I'm looking at this, we were thinking about some other projects the other day, and the loans and the money and available, and we want to make sure that we have all this money to pay the loan. When are we making the commitment about this?
Regarding, go ahead.
Any one of you?
I don't mean to talk over you, Mayor.
Go ahead.
So if I could, let me just walk you through some decision milestones on this
Yeah.
pretty complex solution. And I agree with you, Commissioner Myers. The thing that we try so hard to earn is the public's trust, and our processes are not very intuitive. But at the least, we should be consistent in the processes that we follow, which would include the TAD advisory group. The commission made the decision to delegate some of that advisory oversight to these outside groups. Now, that group will need to be formed and meet and go through that. They're formed, but they need to meet, and we need to orient them and onboard them. And much like the Lexington Road TAD, same situation where you've got an imminent project that we're going to have them react to. But to your point, Commissioner Myers, we need to do that. So here's what I would suggest. The other process I think is important to follow is our normal project delivery. So there's a concept and a schematic design, and so everybody sort of understands that, at least the elected officials do. So I want to remind you that back when we were having these conversations, when there were other suitors to share a deck with, this body approved, I think, $425,000 for staff to go ahead and begin to investigate what the concept for the parking deck. You've already approved some funds for that purpose. I'm told that if you were to design the deck, the total design cost is somewhere in the realm of $1 million. So this is almost half the funds needed to design the building. So with your leave, we're going to go ahead and progress the development of a concept. Okay, and we will use the Classic Center existing user group because this is part of the arena project. And what I would propose for November 1st is that you would, and I'll go through some other motions that the mayor had indicated, that you be teed up to give us direction on this stair tower, because that's imminent, and also perhaps approve the concept of the parking deck, which we would present to you in the October work session. So we'll come to you just like we normally do, and the public. We present that concept. If design has progressed to almost to a schematic design, we may go ahead and share that with you as well. And so what you would be committing to on the front end, to your point, Commissioner Myers, without having all these figured out, is design for the deck to progress, and then the funds create a change order for the contractor to build what's required for this access. All right? I'm trying to think about this in terms of exposure financially. So that would be a milestone. And if you said that at the day after that, we're not doing any more with this parking deck, then that would be what you would be limited to. But in order, the question that we asked staff yesterday was, well, at what point do we need to begin design construction of a parking deck so that it comes online when the arena comes online and you don't have a lot of construction and all of this is the Classic Center? And the answer was now, so this would allow us to go ahead and progress some initial design that you've already approved some funds for, and this would allow us to come through in our normal project delivery process. Now, something a little different from some of the dates that Paul advanced, and there's no wrong answer here, it's just at what pace that you're comfortable with. The sooner we get to a schematic design, if you approve the concept, I think that those are more than just a gross square footage number for construction costs. We'll begin to know a little bit more about what the actual costs look like. It can be a more informed number. What I think you see if you'll go back to the financing part, I think a key thing here is that there's going to have to be a bond that is sold to generate the proceeds in order to do this in a timely manner, so that's another decision point for y'all, okay? So initially, approve the egress, ingress version of it, approve the concept of the parking deck, then the next stage, which may be as little as 30 days, maybe 60, 90 days, we would come back to you with a schematic design, a refined cost estimate, and then permission from y'all to go ahead and begin drafting the documents required for the bond issuance, okay? So that's sort of the second set of decision points that you would have to get to. In the midst of that, so now we're talking November 1st for that, and then maybe 30, 60, 90 days after that. That gives some time to go ahead and get the already formed TAG committee to come together, to try this on, to hear what your preferences are, but not preempt them from giving you feedback as to what they think would be best. So then so if y'all follow me, you got one set of decision points, you got a second set of decision points, and then the third set, which would become hopefully in the spring, is approving the sale of that third bond, and hopefully approving or at least considering the recommendations of the TAG committee as it relates to this 25% and where the 75% goes. So there's three sets of decisions that are spaced out over 3 to 6 months, that at each waypoint you've limited your exposure on how far to go with this thing until you're comfortable. Now, all that being said, it could be that if the TAD doesn't come, if you decide not to do the TAD, or you decide not to do the special district, or something happens, that if, in order to progress this, then you will have to guarantee some portion of this revenue in order to make it happen, and then we'll work the rest of it out if we're running out of time. So that's an eventuality that could happen. But I know that's a lot of information, but I'm just trying to frame it.
May I just say a couple things about that timing, backing into it? Because you're exactly right. You can go right through that series of steps. What I was hopeful that you might see here by looking at this financial model is I understand the TAD takes time. And that may be the biggest part of that time going through. But I was hopeful that you would look at this and recognize that even without the TAD, you're $56,000 away from having the absolute right decision for the
Assuming costs
egress
are
and
correct.
for everything else. And what I will tell you is, in a very short window of time, we're going to know everything about this developer. And what I already know is they're going to develop more than what I have up here as a very conservative revenue projection. So yes, I want 25% of the TAD, but I think if you had to make a leap of faith in somewhere out January, let's say, and say, yes, we're going to move this forward, we're going to approve the bond, we're going to move on, because my fear just on the dates is by April we have to be under construction. If we are to have 10 months to finish it so that the methodology of egress all goes correctly. And so we are a little compressed on time. I'm just trying to give you every option available so that you can understand that we could take a little leap of faith here, pass the bond, move forward with the deck by, say, January, which would, because it does take about 3 months. Once you say, yes, we're going to do the bond, what I've learned is it takes about 3 months to get through validation and pricing and all of those other things that have to happen before we actually close on the bond, and we can move forward with a contractor knowing that we have the money to do it. Just thoughts that have occurred.
And I'm just, because I started this off with this question, the bond people are not going to give us their bond unless we guarantee it with a mixture of this and the various other things. So we're not going to get that. But two, are you also planning on, or are we planning on following up again on the hotel motel tax and sort of like working, just as we brought up, working that as well?
We are happy to ask for that again. We have done so in many cases, year after year. And we are continuing to seek other funding even now.
And because two of our local, state representatives were there and eager, everyone was embracing
saw
this
it, yeah.
Birmingham. And that arena over there, that outside arena, what's it called? An
Amphitheater.
Had some small number of events. What is the number of events we plan to have in this arena?
It will be 300 event days with 125 events with just the arena.
Yeah.
Currently, we are hosting 600 events a year in your
because
convention
the
center.
amphitheater, what was it? It was like 10 cons?
It was like 22.
22?
Usually an amphitheater does about 20 to 25 events a year, so that is not surprising.
Okay.
That's why we decided to do an arena and not an amphitheater.
Jesse?
Thanks. Yeah, I really look forward to receiving the updated version of the slideshow. So we have this financial analysis. And Manager Williams, if you could send us, because we have some colleagues who couldn't be here tonight, and I'm sure with the TAD coming along and everything, so maybe included in future agenda items or at least sent by email that timeline that you mapped out of the procedural steps, so everyone can kind of know how this is all fitting in and be able to anticipate that. I think that would be really helpful. This discussion about what to do with the TAD money and whether this is an appropriate use, I personally view this as an appropriate use, beyond, I would say, like the more traditional arguments of the benefit to the community, as a body that seeks to try to find ways to leverage the public projects we have to push kind of a transformation, an economic transformation in our community. The wage plan attached to this, I don't think should be, right now the wage floor is around 12, right?
It is.
Yeah, so this is a substantial jump, y'all.
Huge.
So I want us to take seriously that that is a public benefit, if the TAD funding is part of the way we make this puzzle come together. Quick question about parking math while we're here. I saw you have 600 spaces listed there, and our Judicial Center proposal calls for 600 spaces. So how many of the 600 spaces in that deck would be left over for a potential use if the Judicial Center was there?
So this was the modification you see up there. I went down to 500 spaces from the document that you had so I could make it work financially. And that envisions 200 going to the hotel, 300 for the Classic Center. But I will say, if you decided to put the Judicial Center on that site, I do intend to share those spaces with the Judicial Center if that be the case. Many arenas do this. The Judicial Center could use those 300 during the day, and we would make use of them evenings, weekends. a lot of arenas do that because most of our events are going to take place in the evening and on the weekend.
Okay. And then you talked about being able to build higher. Does that ability to build higher also mean that the deck could go higher and potentially reduce the cost per space that you were talking about? Or
No,
is
I
that
want to
just-
limit what I'm saying there. It would allow for, the way that we're designing it right now, it would allow for one more level of office space to be placed at the top level of the deck. And I believe it's limited currently to, I want to say 25,000 square feet.
Okay, so we'd be height limited to one more level, and is that covering the entirety of it, or just kind of a portion of it?
It's a portion of it.
Okay.
It's a portion of it right now.
Thank you for all that.
You bet.
Well, if I might, so the one thing for the folks that are watching is that this isn't a huge audible in that there was always a parking deck that was imagined to be a part of the project, but with the escalation, it had to get cut out. And it not only until recently did Paul and his team and the Classic Center Authority develop a way that we might pay for this deck. So I just want to say, it seems rushed, but it's really an old idea that we've come up with some new ideas on how to address. The other thing is that I do think it is very important that we follow our process. Paul, I hear you concerned about getting it started. The thing about a parking deck, it's an expensive building, but it's not a complicated building. So the difference between concept, the amount of time between your concept and your schematic design is probably pretty narrow. So it could be that we're coming right back with, another work session immediately after that to talk about the schematic design and get that cost estimate and begin to figure out what a bond might look like. So that could happen in pretty rapid fashion, I think, with the relative complexity of the building.
I agree.
Tim?
Just had a couple of questions. Yeah, going back to I do support the option A, which you're going through here. I think it makes a lot more sense. And one thing that's not talked about was, I guess I would imagine either the other options, stairs going straight down, you'd have just like a lot more pedestrian traffic happening, trying to cross the streets while we have automobiles going. I mean, it's going to slow down things.
You're exactly
considerably.
right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone to events and experienced that it's not fun. So I mean, I definitely, yeah, the option I think is, even though it is going to be more costly, I think it's the superior by far. My other question though is, so just to try to make sure I'm thinking of this accurately, there, with the designs that we've seen, there's also a bit of a bridge that goes across like the Foundry Street. Is that
He's talking about the area-
plaza?
The plaza.
There's
And on the topo, how it meets Foundry.
Yes, the pedestrian plaza actually comes right out between the Foundry Street warehouse and my existing deck.
Right. So this would be, what we're talking about here would be, there'll be two exits kind of. You'd
That's
have the exit
correct.
over into, yeah.
When
okay.
you walk out of the building, you can go to the right and go to Foundry, or you can go to the left and go to this parking deck, I hope,
Okay. Okay.
as we go forward.
So that, but I guess so what we're seeing here is that plaza exit, there has to be a secondary exit for safety reasons. That's
For that number of bodies.
right. Okay. All right. Yeah. Again, option A, I think is the way to go.
Thank you, Paul.
All
You're
right.
welcome.
Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
Paul.
Paul.
Thank you very much.
Everyone want to take a quick break? We can go 5 minutes.
Mike already had a
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'll. Conversation about our TSPLOST tier funding.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Again, Robert Cheshire, Capital Projects Director. We're going to be talking tonight about establishing the TSPLOST 2023 tier funding schedule. I want to note one asterisk that I put up there. I'm calling it 2022, 2023. You might start seeing that a little bit, especially out of the finance department. We learned in the last couple of weeks, we got the official letter from the Department of Revenue that says we will start collections October 1st, 2022. So in a couple of weeks, we'll start those collections. So obviously we're in the 2022 calendar year. When we first started this, we had anticipated it would be January 1, which would have put us in 2023. So it's a good thing. You know, it's not a big deal, but I just wanted, if you start seeing a 2022 somewhere, don't get confused. In this presentation, I'm going to stick with 2023 because that's what we've talked about for the past year plus. So you'll give me that latitude. I've also asked Stephen Bailey, with Director of Transportation Public Works, and Ryan Solchenberg, Transit Director, to be here. They can help answer questions, but I also invited them because they helped me develop this tier funding schedule. And Kent Kilpatrick was going to be here as well, but he wasn't feeling well, so he's watching remotely for this. But he's only got one project on there, and so I told him by all means to stay home. But I thought it was important to know that this isn't just me putting this together. This is the departments that have the primary number of these projects on here, and this has also been vetted through the manager's office. So that's what I'm presenting this evening to you. Purpose and agenda. Again, the purpose is to establish the tier funding schedule for TSPLOST 2023. This is a 5-year program. I'm going to tell you a little more about the number of tiers that will actually mean on another slide. I'll give a brief history. We'll talk about what is a tier funding schedule, what are the reasons for even having a tier funding schedule, the fact that the tier funding schedule that we're going to propose, that staff is proposing, satisfies a lot of those needs. It satisfies a lot of those program goals that this body put in place. And so we think that it meets a lot of those. We're going to also offer a balanced tier funding schedule, and I'll tell you why. And then I'll show you the tier funding schedule that we are proposing, and then we'll wrap it up with next steps and questions. So a brief history. I didn't originally have this on there, and then Manager Williams mentioned it, and I said, you know, you're right. When we had to advance this vote to May versus November, in a 9-month period, this body did a lot of work. You put together the program goals, you adopted those, you adopted the project selection criteria, and those were taken to heart by the advisory committee. You also established that advisory committee, and then that advisory committee turned around and heard 91 projects submitted in excess of $700 million in value. That was a big task. That was a lot of late nights, and I commend them. And then you met, they were required meetings, but you would have done it anyway probably, and that was meeting with Bogart and Winterville. So you did all of that in 9 months, and then by February 7th, this body approved the projects list, and which equates to the $150 million budget that you also approved that night. And then a week later, you called for the referendum, and then May 24th, the voters passed that referendum. So a lot was done in a very short period of time. So what is a tier funding schedule? Why do we even need it? What it is very simple. It's your projected annual revenues versus those projected annual project expenditures. So it's really that simple. I did mention it as a 5-year program, but it's going to have 6 tiers when you see it. And the only reason being that with collections starting October, that leaves 9 months in this fiscal year. We're using fiscal years for the actual tier funding schedule. Then you've got 4 12-month tiers, and then that last one is a 3-month. So you'll have 6 tiers. I didn't want that to be confusing. And again, we're starting October, so in just a couple of weeks. So why establish it? To me, the biggest priority is the fact that it gives us that effective planning tool that we really need. We need your help in prioritizing those projects. Then we as staff know when that funding is going to be available so we can plan appropriately. And another one, and it's very important right now, especially as we're short on funds, is trying to time those matching funds if there's grant opportunities out there. We know what we're going to need. We know when those opportunities are going to come in, hopefully, and we can match those funds to them. And then another one that I think is very important, especially as y'all are struggling, everybody struggles with where to get that funding. As you start utilizing TSPLOST, or whether it's TSPLOST or SPLOST, you've got that consistent funding on those projects that maybe aren't quite as sexy sometimes, but you get that annual funding you're looking for, and some of those would be pavement and bridge maintenance, and of course culvert maintenance goes along with that. Electrify the fleet, very important to this governing body, and I know that. And then traffic safety improvements. Again, some of those things that maybe are sometimes underfunded. I mentioned this a minute ago, but these are more of the specifics. So some of those stated needs, some of those program goals that we heard from y'all, we're making sure to get those annual transit fund operations in there, and this does that. There's also the continuation of those projects like the Firefly Trail. You hate to get this far along and not finish it. And then those corridor improvements. They're really challenges. Those take a long time to do. But the Prince Avenue, Lexington, Atlanta corridor, this gives us an opportunity to continue some of those plans that we have. Let's build some of those things. And then finally, and this is one I thought was really came across strong in the advisory committee, and it came from y'all as well, and that was getting that installation of infrastructure in those underserved areas. And this I think you'll see is doing that. Staff and myself especially are proposing to not borrow money because primarily we need every penny to go toward those projects that we can. So I would rather not be paying those interest payments like we're doing on SPLOST 2020 and 2018 right now. Regardless of how quick we want to do these projects, there are inherent delays in these projects. Doesn't matter how many staff we put to it. We have a very formal, structured project implementation process that y'all have put in place and adopted, and including work sessions like tonight. These take time to get scheduled, to get in front of you. You know, we had so many of them this week, we split it into 2 nights. I hate to say it, that could become a norm. We have so many projects coming in that we're going to have a lot of these. So work sessions, you heard project concepts tonight. Well, you'll also have a lot of work sessions that follow up with schematic plans. So there's 2 in just themselves. The procurement process, that takes a while to get the design professional on board and go again through a very formal process, takes a little while. IGAs, when we sit down and talk about a pretty complex, we just talked about it in the last one, that's a complex agreement that's going to come out of that. I commend Judd on what he does in the language that he's able to develop, because you're not just developing that for that night, you're developing it for the person looking at it 3 and 4 and 5 and 10 years down the road to go, what did that say? And why are we supposed to be still paying this? Are we supposed to be doing this? Approvals. You have a lot of check-in points with y'all, and rightfully so, but those take time. When we work with the advocacy groups like AIM, those take time. Public art element, it's great, but that's a lot of meetings, a lot with the ACAC, and working those with the user groups to put those all together and get those adopted, and then those come back to you at 2 check-in points as well. And then the last one, it's not by any means the last, but public engagement. I mean, we've heard loud and clear that you want more transparency and you want more public engagement, and I agree with that. But those take time. We showed you a list, and I think Manager Williams sent it out over the weekend, and that was just in September and October. I think we have 11 events going on, and that doesn't even take into account putting the surveys together and uploading those online and going through PIO and going through GIO and getting those vetted properly. That's not the in-person meetings. That's just part of what goes on. So all those things take a lot of time, and again, I'm not fussing about it. That's the reality of it. So those inherent delays to me, and it's shown me on 2020 and it's shown me on 2018 that we have the time to accrue those funds rather than borrowing, so that we can put that money toward the projects themselves.
Robert, do you mind if I make a statement about
Sure.
that? Because Blaine, Manager Williams knows, and Kelly, Mayor Serby say this before. I don't mind borrowing money, and especially in today's climate. Let's look at the pavement cost that we've had to look at this last year. If we would have borrowed money for that paving 5 years ago, when I was suggesting we did that, we would have gotten more paving per road done here in our community, but now we had to cut back on the paving this last year. So I don't want us to totally rule out borrowing some money and what that would look like. I mean, if you borrow just for the last 2 years, that's $40 million that you would borrow right there. Paying at 5% interest over 5 years, that's a yearly payment of about $775,000 a year. So I don't know if my math is right. I may be using fuzzy math, who knows? But you see where I'm going. And here's at the end of the day, we've got to weigh whether or not the interest payments are going to be less than projects that are going to go up in cost these last two tiers or even last 3 tiers, like they have on pavement.
Yeah.
So that's all I'm asking. Joe was going to raise his hand and tell me we can't do that, but.
No, that was a good point. I was going to wait to the end of the presentation, but.
Well, I was too, but I'm.
Now is your point.
No, that's a good point.
To interject this, I just received an email from Ben Brooks, who is, our bond counsel, and he indicated that if there is an intention with respect to the TSPLOST, if you're going to issue bonds, borrow money in that fashion, you have 6 months to validate the election, and so when you do that, you're not committing to issue bonds, but to be able to issue bonds, you have to do that validation process within 6 months. So we have until November 24th to do that.
Well, I'm not even suggesting the bond route.
Okay.
I may be suggesting, like we did with the other
With the other
route,
splosh.
where we borrowed just directly from a
I
bank.
understand. But what I need to say to the commission is, we really are at a decision point. If we think we're going to issue bonds, Ben can proceed with that process, but it's $5,000
But we
to
can,
do that.
but we can borrow.
But we don't have to do that. You're right. That's
Yeah.
just one way. Y'all did it a different way. Did the tax anticipation notes, I think, and borrowing and paid up. How did y'all do it?
We don't use those terms.
Not tax anticipation note.
Yeah. Yeah, no, y'all don't want to do TANs, but
Yeah.
no, we had like a line of credit from a conventional lender at
Paid
the
off
time.
every year.
That was what we had secured, but we never had to use. And I want to offer this too, which I really should have said in the last version, so I'm not walking us back. So we have 2 bonds that we have floated thus far for the Classic Center to the tune of $60–70 million. It's proposed tonight with Paul's presentation that another $14–15 million be put on there. Every time we do that, we float bonds, the rating agencies take a look at us, and there's going to be a point at which they may downgrade us if we have too much bonded debt. And I will tell you that the escalation for public utilities and the fact that we didn't raise rates a couple of years running, we had hoped to cash flow a lot of our capital delivery for the infrastructure renewal and replacement, but with the escalation, we're probably going to have to do some bonded debt to deliver those things as well. So just know, I agree with Commissioner Hamby, if we do borrow, we may look at a more conventional way as opposed to the fixed cost and the process around the bonded debt.
So I guess what I'm hearing, I'm hearing that, and talking to Manager Williams and hearing this tonight, that bonds are not the route we want to go with the TSPLOST. But if you think that's the case, I need to know.
I'm not suggesting bonds. I know that's
Okay.
that's a long
So
process and for
gonna-
5 years, but I want us to be able to have access to the capital in a conventional lending sort of way.
Well, to do the conventional, and you don't have to do this validation.
Right, and I just don't want us to, and I don't know if that, I know you want us to take some action on October 4th. I don't know if that needs to be part of that action or not, or if it could be decided as we move along in the program, or how that would work.
Well, unless I hear otherwise, I'm hearing a consensus that I'm going to advise Ben Brooks, we still got a little time, but I'm going to advise Ben Brooks that we're not interested in issuing the bonds, and there's no need to spend that $5,000 just to have that option.
And
We could put that 5,000 towards pavement movement.
well,
Right.
to build on that, what we will do, if the commission would like us to follow this suggestion, is I can ask David Poyd for his recommendation as our finance director, if we were to borrow some number of funds, say $8–10 million, or you tell me. Well, let me just say, if you're talking about borrowing $50 to $75 to $100 million, then bonds is going to be the way to go.
I agree.
If you're talking like 8,
Yeah.
10, 15 maybe, that might be something a bank would be willing to deal with.
Well,
us
I
on.
want us to be able to, if we see the price of asphalt going up the way it has been, I want us to be able to react quickly and maybe contract out with 2 companies to do the work, or you see where I'm going?
Yes,
To
sir,
put
and you
more
you
money
have
into-
mentioned that, yes, sir.
To put more money into the project so that we get more bang for the dollar, and it's later on. So that's my point. Thanks, y'all.
I would I think that we should keep the door open. So maybe if it's only going to cost us $5,000 to do that process, I think it gives us flexibility. And I would rather us do it than not.
I don't have
I hope you didn't send that email already, Judd.
Any other
So you don't,
borrowing questions before we move on to the rest of the substance?
Well,
presentation?
when it gets to the point of, in this conversation here, I mean, we have $34 million of available balance in the 2018. So my question is, where do we have capacity to move ahead and spend this borrowed money? So that I would like advice on that as well, if that's an option, but let's.
Jesse?
Yeah, I guess I don't want to take lightly that I am guessing I've learned in the short time that I've gotten to see you from time to time, Robert, that you're efficient with your presentations. So I feel like you really took time to lay out how much time this all takes. And we're always talking about our staff capacity and our staff shortage. You know, it's just, I don't know how much benefit practically we get from borrowing, even though it looks good to say we're putting it up front. I'm cautious about that. I hear, you know, my colleague's point about specifically with pavement maintenance, maybe there's like a specific benefit to that or something, but yeah, and maybe if there is enough will in this body to consider borrowing, in my mind, it does make sense to keep the door open for bonds, so we might as well do that. But where I'm currently sitting, like, I feel like I've been humbled in my eagerness in the time I've been on here, and just recognizing the limits to how quickly we can do things, especially if we want to balance, you know, democratic processes and public input and all this stuff, and transparency with meetings, and we want to actually have us and the public be able to attend those meetings where we discuss these things. Like, all that stuff takes time, never mind the time that staff would need to see this through. And you know, yeah, I'll leave it at that for now, but
Well, I'm not trying to start a debate or anything, because I know this is not what we're doing, but I guess Commissioner Houle, I've just point to the discussion we had on pavement this year and how we had to cut back on the streets that were going to get repaved. And that's just an example of, if you were to borrow $8 million, could that put us ahead a year? And I just think with the way we see the trends going and building a 500 square foot, whatever, and then trends going for asphalt and concrete and for sidewalks and stuff like that, I just think it behooves us to at least explore the question about what it would do.
All right, moving on.
What's that?
Okay.
What'd you say?
All was well taken. I appreciate the comments. It's one good thing about, I guess, being older like myself, is I've seen those trends up and down, and if I had just seen that crystal ball to see what you're saying, it just seems like such a no-brainer now, had we done that. I've also seen it go the other direction.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, nobody can really predict what's going to happen in those next couple of years. So we may have already missed that. But I think we ought to explore it. I think it ought to be on the table to look at. And of course, we'll do whatever this board directs us to do. It's hard to predict. It is really hard to predict right now what's going on.
So I guess, Kelly, I'm sorry, I wanted to ask Judd this question. He was looking for whether or not he should go spend the $5,000. And I guess I would say that's okay, just to do that and see what we need to do. I mean, that's just me, but I don't know what others may think.
Well, you want to check with, but Blaine wants to check with David Boyd.
I think we ought to talk to David Boyd.
Let's talk to David, and I think that what Robert wrote up here for a new trail project or something that's going to require a user group design process, so on and so forth, that does take time, and we can program that accordingly. I think where Commissioner Hamby's right, where there's not a long runway to project implementation such as paving, that is more. So I say that to say, let's start, maybe identify the order of magnitude of funds that we need to borrow, because that might point to the mechanism that we use to borrow it. As I said earlier, large amount, bonds, smaller amount, conventional bank.
Yeah.
And that might save that $5,000, you know, if, but
I think that is excellent.
We can give you some feedback and you can let us know what you think.
Yeah.
Can you say Commissioner Hamby was right again?
No, sir, I can't.
Thank you. Good conversation.
All right.
All right, so the tier funding schedule itself, what we're proposing, I'm just going to orient, can everybody see that okay? Because I do.
Yeah, and then we've got a printed copy.
Yes, do have a copy if you need to refer to that. Let me just get you oriented real quick, and the reason I put some colors on here, the light green color on the left, that's your numbers that are identifiers for those projects themselves, and then you have the title of the project. The light blue across the bottom is the annual funds that go to Winterville and Bogart. So as you work your way across column-wise, the first white column is the original budget. That's what was designated on the referendum and approved by the referendum. The second column is program administration that comes off the top of each project. But I do want to note that that has been reduced from, it used to be a 4% that came off. It was reduced to 3% at 2018, and we reduced it, just like we did for 2020, to 2%. So it's continued to come off, and there's reasons for that, but I don't necessarily need to go into that, but we feel good about those numbers. So when you remove the program from the original budget, that next green is the revised budget, and that's the one that we would ask that you approve, and it's the same method that's been used on past SPLOST and TSPLOST, but that is the money that you would approve for the budget for each one of these projects. If you work your way up to the top, across. Again, now you're seeing 6 tiers. It's a 5-year program, 6 tiers, simply because we're starting collections into the fiscal year 23 already. 9 months, 12, 12, 12, and 3. 12, 12, 12, 12, and 3. The top is the projected revenues. Works out to about, it's not hard math. It works out around $30 million for a full 12 months. It's around $30 million a year. That comes with the confirmation from the finance department, David Boyd and his group. And they helped us with all of that. But then the yellow, that's the big, that's what we're really looking at here as far as the tier funding schedule. That is the annual expenditures that, as I sat down with Transportation Public Works and Transit and Leisure Services and sustainability, and we looked at these things, how do we need to break this up to not have to, in my opinion, to not have to borrow, but I do like the thought of maybe doing some things like pavement. I turned around and looked at Steve, and things that you can lock in a quicker and don't require some of that lag that we typically introduce into a implementation project. So anyway, what I like about this is if you look, there's money in those first 2 years for nearly every project. Nearly every project will be initiated in some form in the first couple of tiers. I said years, it's tiers really. And by the third, they all have been initiated in some fashion. Now, initiated may be that you're getting the user groups together, you're getting advisory committees together, you're starting to get your design professionals on board. So it doesn't mean that it's necessarily happening that year, but in that meantime, it allows us to start accruing those dollars starting October 1, and then we kick off everything. And this meets those annual obligations to transit, and again, Ryan is here if he wanted to say anything or if he had any questions, and we need to answer that. I think this is spread out really well. I sat down with the manager's office. They gave me some good advice. We shifted a few things around, moved a little up, moved a little back. But I think this gives us a lot of the work. This is a 5-year program versus a 12-year like a SPLOST. So, I mean, worst case, you're a couple of years out before you start seeing some activity on something. But to Commissioner Hoole's point, there's only so many staff and so many resources that can push these things, and we've got 2018 wrapping up. We're knee-deep in 2020. This is 23. There's a lot of projects going on, a lot of good things in Athens-Clarke County going on, and we were real pleased with what this is proposed to y'all to consider.
I think you guys did a great job.
I can move on. I got a next step, and then come back to questions, or we could start questions here. Mayor?
Let's move on next
Okay.
step, and then we'll get questions about the substance of it.
All right. Next steps would simply be what y'all alluded to, which I would ask for a vote on October 4th, so we can put this in place. And and get the project managers on board and get this thing rolling and start rolling this like we have the 2020.
Robert, maybe if you can go back to the spreadsheet slide, I'm sure
Okay,
all the
yep.
questions will be about the
Okay.
kind of tiering and timing. Melissa?
Yeah, so, some of these projects are shovel-ready, and they're things that have been, conceived of and needed for quite some time. So I kind of feel like those are the projects that, if we are going to borrow money or do some kind of bond, we should focus on those and get them out of the way. But some of these projects are basically buckets. They were conceived as buckets, and this process of, reaching out to the community, which could take years. So, and that might not necessarily require a bunch of funding on the front end.
And we took that into account.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like, but they're also very important safety projects.
Mhm.
I mean, we've had some unprecedented traffic and pedestrian deaths, and people drive like maniacs these days, and with all the growth, especially in our in-town neighborhoods, and thousands of students being injected. I mean, I've been riding my scooter around in-town neighborhoods and about getting run over every other day. So there are definitely some real dire traffic calming needs in neighborhoods that are on this list and specifically targeted by this list. So I'm wondering what the process is for getting that started, getting that community engagement process started, so we can get these concepts to spend this money taken care of.
That's exactly the way we set it up. We went ahead and broke this down. If there was something we could initiate, like the user group or whatever stakeholders, and they're in that first year, you don't necessarily need a lot of funding for that. Those are the ones that we will get rolling on, the very ones that you're talking about. A lot of the East Athens neighborhood projects were some of them that would crank up very quickly. And
The Hancock one is pretty dire with all the students being brought into that neighborhood.
Yep, and that
High-rises
is in here. And again, we've put the money into place to where we think we're going to have maybe a matching money with anything that had to do with the roundabout, which could in turn free up that money and put it into the neighborhood for the traffic calming. So that's why I sat down with Stephen especially. I don't know if you want to add anything yet or not, but we really took that into account. In addition to, Lexington Road, that's already moving along with the sidewalk. So the funding is set up in the front here to take advantage of the fact that that's already rolling along. So every one of these really got that critique to try to make sure the funding's there when you need it. We can start quickly, especially on stuff, even if the funding's not quite there, we can get the ball rolling on the groups that need to be working through that process that you mentioned.
Thank you.
Carol?
Yeah, first, really appreciate it and absolutely love it's only 5 years long. That's so wonderful. I mean, that'll be there in no time. Very, very appreciative of the Firefly Trail project up front in there so that we can get that done. That's been a long time working on that. I did want to ask, just so you can explain, and I know we have Stephen in here, on some of those big bucket projects from up above, like the Lexington Corridor or the Prince Avenue that's been working on. I'm just curious how, I'm assuming there's a rhyme and reason to this, but the Lexington Corridor project has a bunch of things lined up, and the Prince Avenue has a bunch of stuff lined up. So for efficiency's sake, did you guys spread out that money? How did that work out? Since you have the projects ready, why are we going to wait for the next year? Why are getting the things done together? Because that's what I'm just curious about, and I assume you guys have a reason for that.
Yeah, for those particular ones, didn't just sit down with Stephen. Stephen was at the table, but sat down with Diana for Prince Avenue, Derek on Lexington, Derek on the Atlanta Highway, and all of those are with. In fact, I moved a little more money up than I really wanted on a couple, and he said, Derek, for example, said, we're going to be ready on that. We're going to need that money.
Is that lined up then with the sub-projects from the different places?
Yes.
Yes, Stephen. Okay.
Best we could tell.
Okay.
And I didn't keep it balanced just to keep it balanced. If we were way off on something, we sat down and talked about it to see, is it realistic? Is there something we can move back? And you say, we really don't want to move anything back, but it's just realistic that that's where it is. Or maybe it just wasn't as a pressing need as those existing projects that are already moving along and in the hopper. So I feel good that we took that into account. And in addition, if something is a little bit behind somewhere else and it frees up some money and you needed it in this other one, it doesn't mean that we can't use some of that money. We just can't use more than is appropriated for it.
And likewise, just building on this is my only question, that's that money from TSPLOST 2018 and how that's being spent is all,
I'm glad you said that, because Stephen reminded me of that. He said, there's some of these that we've got the 2018 money ready to go, so we won't need the 2023
Right.
money right away. And he brought that to my attention, and Derek too as well, so that freed up a little bit, because we're set to go. I don't know if you want to add.
Just Hancock's a prime example of that, right, where we're now able to spend. The West Broad and Hancock would be a prime example of that, because now we're able to spend that 2018 money now on some of those smaller projects, and then the roundabout can be paid out of the 2023 money when it comes due. So, yeah, that's the largest consideration, but there are quite a few other ones with bike ped funds where we have that money existing right now with those funds.
thanks.
Jesse?
Couple things. One, I loved what we got from you before with the super elaborative, the super spreadsheet of the project timelines of everything from SPLOST 2020. So can we expect that we'll get something like that similarly?
Yes.
And that would be after we pass whatever the final version
Yeah,
is?
that's referred to as a master implementation plan. That dials down a little bit further, and you will get copies of that when it's developed.
And will that be available for the public to view too?
Yeah,
So
it-
people
it
can kind
would
of
be anybody.
understand the thing they voted on that's adjacent to them or that they drive down every day, when to expect to see things.
Yeah, we're really getting that a lot better. We've gotten some new software and really have started, Jacobs has done a really good job of building that and keeping the project managers, keeping those real time, maybe slightly behind, but not a whole lot. And we're getting a lot better at that. So we use that internally. We need it, so it's going to be available to anybody.
And then this is probably more for Blaine, maybe to follow up with us at some point, but could you, following up on the discussion earlier about borrowing, and you kind of wanted to caution us about how that can affect our bond ratings. Could we get some kind of a memo on what our current bond ratings are, what you anticipate this could do to them, and maybe just a brief rundown of what that ultimately means? Because, I was thankful I got a class at ACCG that helped me understand it. I'm not a finance expert, and that impressed upon me that this kind of abstract, obscure thing can have a lot of impact in a way that we might not, immediately realize when we're making a decision to borrow. So if we could just get that from you at some point, or if you want to share it now, I think that would be really helpful.
No, I won't belabor it, but I will share this. So in all of that, I will ask our finance director to give us some insights, both on, where we're headed, what it means, and just I want the public to know this, because I think this is very important for the way that this government's been run and the decisions you've made. So the current bond rating, there's a couple of different rating agencies, is AA+, which is only one step below the best bond rating you can have at AAA. And there are structural reasons why we can't get to AAA, namely the size that we are and some other things. That's important because the better the bond rating, the less interest that you end up paying, and it costs the taxpayers, or in the case of public utilities, a ratepayer. So I want to assure everybody that financially, everything's been managed very well, and we're in an optimal situation. So what it would mean that if we did get quote-unquote downgraded because of the amount that we're borrowing, it doesn't mean that we're a bad, not financially, not managed well. It's just that with the more debt that we take on, then it becomes more of a potential credit risk, and bondholders are going to want a little bit more of a premium. That's what all that means. And so I'll get our finance director to give us some insights on that.
And maybe also just some insight on what it would take to rebound from a downgrade, the timeline and what would need to happen. Because if ultimately we're talking about a decision that could impact that, I think it's important we understand that.
But something that Commissioner Meyer said, I'm sorry, Commissioner Hull. So you mentioned the guarantee, so I want to be clear. So any of this bonded debt that's going out, including the Classic Center, has the guarantee, full faith and credit of the government behind it. So if they were not able to make those payments, we would need to step in. So that's true of all the bonds that we have here. It would be different with TAD bonds, though. TAD bonds don't require our full faith and credit. But.
And sorry, last question. This is a little more specific, but I feel like I'd be remiss to not ask. So I noticed that, we changed our neighborhood traffic management plan. I'm glad we added that in to this SPLOST project, this TSPLOST project list. But I noticed that's one of the few that waits to kick in. But I also, as I understand it, TPW has been reviewing a huge number of requests that came in after that update in the policy, including, as I understand it, 2 for neighborhoods that are also on this list, Westchester and Stonehenge, which happen to be in my district and are also bumped back a bit. And I was just curious if we could get an explanation on why that project was tabled and whether we're anticipating having some funding available from another source to help pay for some of those projects, or would we need to bump that up in order to have the funding we need to start to see those through?
So we've currently got about $400,000 in SPLOST 2011 funds for NTMP, for neighborhood traffic management. And we need to see the rate at which that's going to be spent out. We'll soon be able to know how much this first year of so many neighborhoods, over a dozen that have applied this year. But I don't see us spending that $400,000, even with that large inflow, too quickly. So that's why we felt comfortable waiting a few years to start kicking in 2023 funds.
Okay. And then specifically for Stonehenge and Westchester, where I understand there's been approval to move forward with something in those neighborhoods, and the neighborhood has been meeting with TPW, does the bumping back of the rest, because those project proposals included a neighborhood traffic calming component, so does, tiering the rest of those projects out a bit preclude TPW from acting on the traffic calming component with the NTMP program?
I don't think so, no. And looking at that, so part of our question would be, would both of those need user groups to move forward, or since, I think part of our discussion during the application process was building a pretty good concept, is that good enough? So that's one question I think we'd probably want to answer, is which of those would need user groups, because if they do, we are probably not looking at tier 1, but maybe tier 2, tier 3.
Okay. Well, yeah, as long as we retain a solid way forward for at least slowing down the speeding cars through those neighborhoods efficiently, I think this is great, and thanks for this,
Tim?
Yeah, just briefly, yeah, I think this is, I know the SPLOST one we dug into a lot more and stuff and everything, but this one I look at, I'm like, this makes sense. So, fantastic job. Onto the borrowing conversation, again, I guess the things that I kind of marked that I saw there possibly applicable there would be definitely the pavement and bridge and the culvert live stream. I guess possibly the traffic signal and traffic safety infrastructure. So all that stuff doesn't add up to massively outside of the pavement. It is a large one there. And on the pavement and bridge, I guess one reason I was kind of interested in and maybe trying to borrow money on that one is mainly on the Fowler Mill Bridge issue, knowing that we're kind of trying to get a expedited Band-Aid situation where it could be open to local traffic only.
And you'll see the better report on Tuesday.
Right. So I assumed that, but I just wondered if we could look at, borrowing more just to try to have that be a more long-term remedy that can be expedited faster.
I can address that. So as you'll see in the agenda item, we have been waiting for some level of commitment from GDOT to fund the construction of the bridge. And I'll also add, this is consistent with a similar partnered project on Belmont Road, as well as the West Broad, where the government funds design, engineering, right-of-way, and GDOT funds the construction. So there's been an inconvenient delay at the least for folks that live out there, but we feel like we've gotten the commitment from GDOT to fund the balance of that construction. Two things. The first being that we do believe that there are some temporary repairs that could be made in the near future that would allow us to utilize the bridge, and we think we can afford to do that with the funds that we have on hand.
Okay.
Number two, I think the construction of the bridge, of the new bridge, is targeted for FY26, and that's GDOT money. So we can hurry up with some design and things of that nature, but the ultimate, and that I think all in is about $750,000 for design and right-of-way. A little bit more than that. But the balance several $1 million would be for the bridge proper, and that's out of our control and in GDOT's hands. So I say that to say that we would just need to look at each individual project individually, but I understand your intent to try and get that thing done.
And the temporary bridge repair reopens the bridge until it gets replaced in FY '26, right? Yeah.
And Stephen, do you want to add anything to that, sir? And if you do, you got to come up.
Not wanting us, we don't have to, I mean, we're going to be able to get into this in the agenda setting, but just, yeah.
So we're looking at about between 3 to 6 months for the temporary or interim repair, and then that would remain open until 2026 when they would demolish it and put in a new bridge. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. All right, cool. Thank you.
Patrick?
All right, kind of maybe a strange question, but like when it comes to the RFP process for all these projects, can we just get like what does the process look like? Can we get just one contractor? Because most of these are going to be like pavement, sidewalks, and paths and stuff. Is it possible to just get one contractor, just do them off and knock them out?
Well, what you'll probably end up doing is having a general that hires subs that we would have hired anyway to do the work. We see companies like Astra, for instance, who've done trails, they've done Clayton Street, they're doing the airport. They tend to look at these hardscape projects, which is different from Pittman, for instance, who does our paving. So we could, from a coordination standpoint, ask, but the issues are that the trails, sidewalk projects involve a good bit of design, and especially when you're talking about in neighborhoods, you're going to want that user group in the neighborhood, the citizen engagement, make sure people are heard. That's different from, we already know what our priorities are for paving, and we can say, these are the roads, y'all approve it, then we're getting to work. So it is possible, Commissioner, it's a good idea from an efficiency standpoint, but I think we would pay a little bit of a premium for that general contractor to manage projects that would go quickly, perhaps in the course of a paving season, or stretch over several years in a more involved citizen engagement type process.
Jesse?
Yeah, I've noticed that our transit director, Solcherberger, has been here for the whole time. And, we've been talking a lot about transit, although it hasn't come up so much tonight. And if I'm recalling correctly, when we had kind of mapped out this project list in its final form, we had put what we thought was a full amount into transit, but then anticipating some federal funds that might help pay for some of what that would go for, which might free up those funds to move into some other bucket, for example, pavement, which we were underfunding compared to staff's recommendation. And I know a lot of things have evolved since then around federal funding. Could you give us an update on just kind of the funding picture for transit and what federal funds might be expected through the infrastructure bill and things that may or may not be making that anticipated decision before we passed this list months back a reality in the future?
Certainly, Commissioner Houle. So I can speak to what these funds will do for the Transit Department and Athens-Clarke County, which is the funds that are set aside here will be used as local match for federal funding. So, for example, if we project our operating expenses at $7 million in a year, we will divide those expenses up into what we feel are eligible expenses, submit those in an application, and the Federal Transit Administration will then reimburse 50% of the total operating cost, which is where our 50% of a local match comes in. For bigger projects, our local match of 20% would go to fund capital projects as opposed to operating project or operating assistance. So that's how these funds will be used.
Okay. Thank you. And that would include like these transit satellite, I keep wanting to call them satellite hubs, but what are the transfer stations?
The transfer stations
transfer
are
that
projects that are on the docket and in consideration for capital development, yes.
So there is essentially a plan to try to use all of the funding that's allocated to transit to see through the plan as it is for transit?
Yes, that's correct.
And do you anticipate that federal funding may come in at an amount that we have more than we might need, or is that already just going to go to the next thing? Like we get operations going and then that goes towards the capital project?
Yes, so these are reimbursements from the Federal Transit Administration. So for example, after August is complete, by the end of September, we submit the eligible expenses to be reimbursed. So it's then the funding is reimbursed. So the funds don't come in first. In terms of the capital projects, it works the same way, but the local match is less for capital projects. So on the operating side, the local match is 50%, and on the capital side, the match is between 10 and 20%.
Okay.
We do intend to have a work session to talk about transit finances in general, because it is complicated at the least.
Okay, for sure, yeah. I guess it's just, this is helpful because as this conversation has evolved, I feel like the picture we're sitting in now is a bit different, not unlike tons of other things we're talking about, than the picture we thought we had when we set up this list. And the picture we thought we had when we set up this list was that there might be, because of federal funding, more money than we needed for transit, which we could then reallocate toward pavement. But it was there for transit first as like the priority. And now, if what we're looking at is that that money won't be freed up, this body needs to think seriously about how we make up that funding gap on pavement. So I just wanted us to have that in mind.
Any other questions? All right. Ryan, Stephen, Robert, thank you so much.
Thank you all. Appreciate all that y'all do. I know it's not, y'all got a lot of late nights with us as well, so thanks.
All right, everybody, thanks for doing double duty this week. Hope everybody has a great night.